A few years back, I was working for a company. I would put so many work hours in an attempt to climb the career ladder, and all of those hours were unpaid, of course. I used to use my lunch breaks to catch up on sleep. It became routine for me to pull into a quiet area, eat lunch, read a bit, and have a sleep. In my evenings, I would always visit clients, and that meant that from lunchtime till early evening, my bosses assumed I was traveling. It was a little dishonest to sleep on the job, but I was so tired from working overtime, and my company were ignoring the labor standards law. I never managed to sleep deeply in the car, so I guess that's why sleep paralysis soon found me. It was a cold day in December when it happened. I was en route to a client's, and I found a great area to pull into to take a nap. I found a vacant plot of land by a dam, a blind spot from the highway behind some bushes, ate, reclined the seat, and read. And before I knew it, I was asleep. When I opened my eyes, the LCD display screen in my car displayed a track and the time. It was 6:05 p.m., and I think Radiohead were playing. I remember thinking, "Oh, you idiot, you overslept." I went to put my chair back into position, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, and the atmosphere in the car was dark. My eyes were fixed on the windscreen. I could see something dark in the upper hand right side of the windscreen. It was a shadow of a human hand. The time changed on the LCD display to 6:06. My eyes hurt for some reason. I looked back to where the hand was, and there was now a shadowy head peering down at me. I couldn't make out any facial features. It was just a black silhouette, with one hand resting in the middle of the windshield. It was staring at me. Even though I couldn't see its eyes, I knew that it was just staring at me, observing me like I was a fish in a fish tank. While it was staring at me, I felt intense feelings of anger and unbearable waves of sadness. I'd heard stories about people feeling these feelings when in proximity to the paranormal, but I'd never believed it. It's like you sense someone's final emotions. It was unexplainable. I couldn't move. I was just face to face with this dark shadow. I was asking myself if I was asleep or not, and was trying to figure out what the shadow was. A lot was happening. All the while the shadow was staring at me without a single form of slight movement. I had the ability to move my eyes, but suddenly I was unable to. All of the surrounding colors in the car and outside the windows faded away. I couldn't see my book anymore, and the LCD clock disappeared. I was slipping into darkness. It was terrifying. Then I heard a knock. It was against the window. My fear was now at its peak. I still couldn't move, and now something was trying to get in, or at least make its presence known. Then I realized that it was a knocking sound. Hearing it louder the second time, I was suddenly freed from the bounds of sleep paralysis. It was bright out, and I looked at the clock. It was 2:30, nowhere near the 6:05 p.m. I saw earlier. I heard the knock again. It wasn't part of the nightmare, though, I had just been through. I looked out of the window and saw two shadows. The sunlight was obscuring their faces. I put my window down and shielded my eyes. Two police officers were stood in front of me. One looked 30, the other 50. They announced themselves. I was disoriented and a bit on edge, so perhaps I was a bit rude, and said something like, "What's the problem?" "What are you doing here?" the older officer replied. "I was just taking a nap." "What's wrong? Is this private land or something? I didn't mean to trespass." "No, that's not the problem. As you know, we're in a recession at the moment. You come here to this place alone? We're just making sure you're not doing anything stupid." I asked him what he was implying. "Sir, have you come here to take your own life?" I told him honestly that I just pulled over because I'd been so tired at work, but I wasn't going to do anything like that, and I apologized for giving them that impression. I could have never been ready for his response. "Sir, with the greatest of respect, we saw what you were doing in your car. You were strangling yourself to the point that your eyes rolled back. Are you sure nothing's wrong?" I was completely floored by this statement. After a while, I managed to convince myself that I was going to be okay, and said that I would get some rest, and they wouldn't have to worry about me, and that I wouldn't be coming back. I got out of there as fast as I could and headed back to the office. I called the client and asked if they were okay with a phone consultation, and they were. I didn't want to be alone. I left that damn area feeling truly terrified. Since that day, I didn't want to take naps in my car again. Every time I would feel tired, I would just remember that shadow and what the officer said I had been doing in my car. I slipped into a light form of depression due to lack of sleep, stress, and it was affecting my work. I was the bottom performer. Within a month of seeing the shadow on my windshield, I left my job, and no one complained or cared. I was saving myself from being fired, to be honest. I didn't know what that shadow was, but recently I'm not so sure if it was paranormal or not. I just think I had a scary dream brought on by my tiredness and the state of mental health at the time. At least, I tell myself that. For better or worse, it got me to leave my company and prioritize my health. I'm a bit frightened that the shadow will come back one day, if I enter another period of unhappiness in my life. My physical and mental health wasn't that good. That's perhaps why sleep paralysis came for me. To anyone out there listening, take care of yourself if you can relate. Mental health and a work-life balance are important and underrated.
My dad's best friend grew up in India and was always a cautious boy. The reason for this is because his parents consulted a seer to know their fate. The boy was told that he was destined to die young, by cause of water, and this fate was bound to his soul. In an attempt to circumvent this, the boy's parents had his name changed and ordered him to stay away from water of any form. They thought this had ultimately changed his soul, as names are a pretty big deal in Hinduism. My dad and he had some big plans, then to leave India during college for greener pastures. They left for Germany and later the States together. However, midway through college, my dad's friend had to return to India for a family affair. My dad proceeded to America alone and had a family. He then had a business trip back to India and thought, maybe I should visit my old friend. He went back and searched for his friend. The town elder said he died 20 years ago at the age of 22. The cause of death? Drowning. Trying to save a child caught in a flood. I think the child survived, so his sacrifice wasn't in vain. I can't explain how the seer saw this or even could know. The seer saw that the boy would die both young at 20 and by water, both of which were correct. I want to believe it was mere coincidence, but there are way more stories like this that my parents have. People say it's just a coincidence, but story after story I begin to wonder, could the old religions really have been onto something?
I have a few stories I'm going to share. I work at a nursing home and would pick up extra shifts on my days off, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., or would sometimes work doubles. I worked on 2 wings. One night, while working in the West Wing by myself, it was around 3 a.m., and I heard a wheeled walker, the kind with the wheels on the front and the little rubber stops on the back, coming up the hallway to the nurse's station. Thinking it was a resident wanting a pain pill, as some of them would walk up instead of ringing their call bell, I sat and waited, hearing the walker wheels on the tile hallway floor. And after a while, I thought to myself, they should have made it to the nurse's station by now. It's not that far of a walk. I got up from the desk, looked out to the door into the hallway, and nothing. There was no one there. As soon as I stood up and got close to the doorway, the noise stopped. I was so confused that I did rounds, checked on every person in every room, even empty rooms, and every resident was asleep. And every empty room was just that. Empty. One evening, between 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift, 2 other aides were with me, sitting at our round table, chatting in the front room. This is within the nurses' station. Our nurses' station is split into 2 rooms with a big open wall between them. We have a very large med cart right inside the second room of the nurses' station, and you can see it from the round table. It's diagonal from it, right through the doorway. And we're all talking when all of a sudden we hear a weird scraping noise. We all look over towards the med cart where it was coming from, and our styrofoam cup full of plastic spoons went flying off the med cart with force, strewing the spoons all across the room. I got up and put the cup back. The cup had Velcro on the bottom and was Velcroed to the top of the med cart, so when we pushed the cart around it didn't tip up and spill. I picked them up and put them back. I tried hitting the cup to see how easily it could get knocked off, but it couldn't. You literally had to use force to pick it up, and you couldn't knock it over. We were all so excited, and there were only 20 minutes left of our shift, and we couldn't wait to leave that night. I was then working on a different wing for a while. There was a room in this wing called the Blue Room, which was 4 doors down from the nurses' station, on the same wall of the nurses' station. I was with a co-worker almost finishing our shift. It was around 10 p.m, and there's a piano in the Blue Room, and I kid you not, it began playing. It was quiet, as if someone were barely pressing on the keys. I got up, thinking one of the residents got out of bed, couldn't sleep and wanted to do something, and they're allowed access to this room at any time. The closer I got to the room, the more quiet the piano played, until I got up to the room and turned on the light. As I did so, it immediately stopped playing. I stayed close to my co-worker and vice versa for the rest of our shift. During a day shift around 1 p.m. or so, every room has a call bell. They're just like a light switch with a small hole in the actual switch part, with a long sturdy string attached, so that the string can reach their bed, chair or floor in case they fall over or need something. To switch it on or off, you have to give it a good yank or it won't switch on. When switched on, the call bell rings loudly. You can hear it the whole length of the long hall, and we have a lighted number board right in front of the nurses' station on the opposite wall, so that when we're at the station sitting at the desk, we can see it right in front of us. Whichever room call bell is flipped on, it will blink on said room number on our board. All doors also have a pretty big light right above them. If the resident's call light is on, this light will also blink. Residents just got back from lunch, and room 126 call light is going off. I got up, then thought to myself, room 126 has no one in it anymore. He had recently passed away about a month prior. I thought maybe someone walked into the wrong room, but who knows? Old people do weird things sometimes. Or maybe someone from maintenance was doing something and needed help. Some of my residents do have early onset dementia and Alzheimer's, and sometimes forget which room is theirs. I go to the room, go to open it, and it's locked. I get the keys out my pocket, open the door, and all the lights are on, and the call light is still ringing/turning on. I turned off all the lights and the call light. I thought maybe the string got stuck in/around the small nightstand below it, causing it to turn on. The small nightstand was the only furniture in the entire room. Family left it for us to reuse as they didn't want it. I moved the dresser to the opposite wall to make sure there was no AC or heat turned on, and took the string off the call bell. My boss heard it go off. Her office is right next to the nurses' station on this wing, and asked me if whoever rang it was okay. I said yes, and explained what happened. Not even a minute after my explanation, it started to ring a second time. Same exact thing. I went to the same room, unlocked the door. The lights were all on, even though I know I turned them off, and the call light was ringing. I flipped the switch, turned off all the lights, locked the door, and shut it behind me. My boss followed me in this time, and was just as unnerved as I was. Nothing more happened, and we got a new admission that next day that moved into the room. The next and final thing was one of the creepiest I've ever encountered. Black-eyed creeping teenagers, but we'll get to that. You see, we had a double room with 2 people in it, a mother and daughter. The mother was 98 but in pretty good health, besides a fall the year prior and her diabetes. The daughter was 66 and had small seizures/epilepsy and would have falls often. They both moved around pretty well with their walkers though. Their call bell went off one night, but only for a few seconds, just long enough for me to look up and look onto the call light board to see the light flashing for their room number, which was 133A, for the first half of their double room, where they have a living room set up. If the light went off for 133B, that would have been the second half, either the call light in the bathroom or in between their beds. I went back to check on them. They were both sound asleep, snoring, and the last time I did rounds at midnight, they were asleep then too. I brushed it off as a malfunction or something. I short-shifted myself, so I was working a double, and had worked this said night from 11 to 7 a.m., then working into the next day 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. I got off an hour early for picking up this shift since we were short-staffed. So it's now 7 a.m. and I start doing my rounds, waking everyone up, starting at the top of the hall, room 121, and going to the clear end of the hall, room 133. I go to the mother-daughter room and wake them up. They're both already awake, which is unusual. They like to stay up later than most of my residents and have a hard time getting up in the morning. I wish them good morning, go get the mother's AccuCheck to see how her sugar is and how much insulin she'll need. And she begins telling me, "You need to tell Elsa those teenagers to stop crouching down at our living room window all night." Mind you, this is the only 98-year-old I've ever met with a mind so sharp. She was still 100% completely with it, and I asked her to elaborate and tell me what happened. She said that every night this week, right when they crawl into bed, they can both see shadows outside their living room curtain and can hear people knocking and tapping on the glass. They can hear them having conversations with each other and laughing excessively, sometimes for up to 5 minutes continually. She told me it's 3 teenagers. She said the first night it happened, they kept saying, "Please let us in. We're cold, and we need to use your phone and call our mum." She also said that last night she got up out of bed and turned on the light and looked out the window. She was going to yell at them. She could see their shadows standing up only inches from the window, and when she went to open the curtain, they crouched down again underneath it. She also explained that the previous night, when she opened the curtain for the first time, she only turned on the small lamp on the other side of the room and saw their faces peering in the window before they ran away faster than she's ever seen anyone run. She explained their clothing looked 90s style, and their eyes were completely black, saying that it looked like one giant pupil instead of a pupil with color around it. She was very adamant on what she saw and never changed her story once, and her daughter backed this up, saying that she saw and heard them too. The next night, a co-worker messaged me on Facebook at around 12:20 as I was off, saying that I needed to call her ASAP. I called and she explained to me that she got caught up counting meds and didn't start her midnight until 12:10. She said when she got to room 133 she heard a tapping on the glass, knowing what these 2 women have been claiming has been happening to them at night, and she opened the room door the rest of the way and quietly walked in. She got to the window and saw the same teenagers that the residents described, walking away from the window up towards the street, except she said they weren't totally opaque. It was almost as if they were muddy or blurred, and not human. She was so scared that she had called security to come sit with her the rest of her shift, and our security officer did just that. After that week, my co-worker was the only other person besides the mother and daughter, and the last person to ever see those teenagers with black eyes and blurred bodies. After sitting with my co-worker that night, the security guard started patrolling between 11 to 1 a.m. But the teenagers were never seen again. When I was 8, my sister and I shared a room on our first floor. Our bedroom door sort of led into the kitchen. My sister had this monkey clock that I looked at every morning to gauge how much more time I had left to sleep in. One morning at 7:20-ish, I woke up and rolled over to look at the clock. In my groggy gaze, I got the time, but then who I thought was my dad moved in front of it. Now at the time I remember seeing a dark figure with no visible features like pure black. I did not think anything of it since I was just waking up and assumed it was just my tired eyes. Seeing this, and yes, I made note that I did, I started to rub my eyes and feel him sit at the foot of my bed. At the same time I said, "What is it, Dad?" But I didn't get an answer. I sit up as quickly as possible and see no one there. I look back towards the monkey clock, and under a minute has passed. I sprinted out of bed and into the kitchen to find my dad, but the only one there was my mum at the counter, with a now shocked look, with her looking directly at me. I mean, I did just come to her rushing out of my room for no reason. Before she had a chance to ask me anything, I say, "Mum, where's Dad?" Puzzled, she says, "He left at like 6:30, probably at work by now, why?" Obviously, I couldn't tell her why, she'd think I'm nuts. So I just said, "Never mind. Thanks, Mum. I'm going back to bed." For a good while, I forgot about it, but years later, my older sister asked me if I'd ever seen a black figure walking through the house. My heart stopped at the realization that my eyes were not playing tricks on me. Years after, I told my dad, who to this day is a skeptic. He, of course, didn't believe me, and said that just makes me think someone was in the house, which was impossible without my mum knowing. Personally, I believe, and also know he wasn't there to hurt me. Perhaps it was a caring soul that was just passing through, which is why I immediately thought of my dad. My family, especially the children, have always been bothered by paranormal activity. My mom, dad and I gained guardianship of my nephew, Memphis, when he was a newborn. He never had any trouble sleeping by himself until my dad passed away and we had to move in with my older brother in Oklahoma. He was immediately terrified of the bathroom, closet, and to sleep alone. He was around 6 at the time, so could somewhat articulate what he was seeing. He always referred to it as the smiley guy. Creepy as hell, I know, and when we asked him to draw this smiley guy, what he drew was a brown monster-looking thing with a sharp, bloody smile. As I mentioned before, we were living with my older brother Dusty. He also had a son, Leyland, but was much younger than Memphis, so couldn't really explain what he was seeing, only described it as the Grinch, and would get so scared and cry so hard from night terrors and seeing this thing that he'd be able to turn blue and pass out. I slept in the room nearest the bathroom, and could without a doubt feel this extremely heavy, evil, negative energy. I didn't even want to go to the bathroom by myself either, but I had to put on a brave face for my nephew and take them to the bathroom and try to distract them. It was hard though, because I could feel it behind me when we were in the bathroom, and they'd tell me it was behind me. So kinda hard to ignore. So those bathroom trips were done as fast as humanly possible. My nephew Memphis is now 13 and does not remember the smiley guy, just what we've told him. He sees shadow people and hears whispering at night though. My sister Jenny has a daughter called Thule, who was 2 at the time. They lived in a haunted house together and, ironically, they both felt a horrid, evil presence near the bathroom at the end of the hallway. She wouldn't go to the bathroom by herself and wouldn't sleep by herself. Jenny is very religious and would pray every night, but to no avail. Her daughter would be playing and all of a sudden begin crying and say, "David, David," and point at nothing. We didn't actually know anyone called David, and this went on for quite a while. The crying about David took a toll on my sister mentally, and it all came to a head one night as they were sleeping when my sister woke up, seeing Tully's legs being lifted by an invisible force from the ankle, and her legs up in the air as if they were trying to pick her up by the feet and hang her upside down. My sister grabbed her and ran to the living room and prayed herself to sleep. She moved out shortly after, for obvious reasons, and later found out that a man had died in the home. The landlord conveniently left that information out. Now, and finally, my daughter. A few months ago she got up from our bed to go to the bathroom. Nothing out of the ordinary, she always does this. The next thing I know, she comes flying back to our room and is crying, saying she's seen a man with a piece of his body missing. So once again, another one of the children in my family refuses to go to the bathroom alone at night. She also told me she was going to the bathroom and her hand was inside the shower. She came around the shower door and tried to grab her dress and pull her in from the toilet, as our toilet and shower are fairly close to one another. I don't know what this is, why all the kids are being tormented, but I will end this on a brighter note. My beloved Aunt Sherry on my mum's side got sick in 2016. She lived in Texas, and we lived in Oklahoma. We went down to visit her in March of 2016 when my daughter had turned 2. Since we lived in separate states, my Aunt Sherry had only seen my daughter once when she was a baby. During our visit, my aunt was so sick, she didn't want the kids to see her that way and have those be the last memory she had of her. So my daughter never saw her at the hospital. We stayed for about a week and things actually were looking up for my aunt. But unfortunately, not long after we got back to Oklahoma, we got the call that she had passed. Some time goes by and my daughter is laying with my mum looking at various pictures of family members that my mum has all over her wall. My daughter would then point to a picture and ask, "Who's that?" My mum would tell her and so on. Then my daughter pointed at my mum's open door, which led to an empty hallway, and said, "And that's Sherry, right?" and gave a shy smile and wave. I want to stress my daughter has no memories of Sherry being alive. There aren't even any pictures of her as an adult in our house, just of her and my mum as kids. My mum told me this and I was very happy that my favourite aunt got to know my baby, even if we couldn't see her. One day as I was cleaning and my daughter was playing in her room, I asked as I was walking down the hallway, "Are you alright playing by yourself, honey?" And she said so matter-of-factly, "I'm not alone, I'm playing with Sherry." I honestly don't know if my daughter realizes Sherry is dead. She talks about how funny she is and how nice she is and how happy it makes her to see her. Just the other day she said, "I'm surprised Sherry didn't come see me today, I was feeling sad." And after a few days my mum knocked on the door and my daughter asked, "Who's that?" And I said that it was Grandma. "Oh, I thought it was Sherry." And then she carried on with her day. Most of the things my family have experienced have been horrible, so it's nice to know my amazing aunt is still looking out for my girl. It should be noted I personally have never seen ghosts, not as a child nor adult, and although I have had horrible sleep paralysis, I have never seen a ghost.
When I was a kid, I must have been between 10 or 12 or something. I had this guy who lived in my neighborhood who was 4 years my senior. We used to play together, and he would tell us these stories about how he used to see fire in certain areas of his house, and the visuals stopped when his grandfather got some holy rituals done in the house. Back then, I never believed him. A few years later, we're all grown up, and Patrick's mum accidentally caught fire in the kitchen. Patrick's elder brother tried to save her and got his hands burnt in the process. No one knows how it happened. And after being in the hospital for 2 to 3 days, she succumbed to her injuries. And at the time, we didn't have those childhood stories in our recollection. And then later that year, we're all friends, and we're just having a late night walk and talking about ghost stories, just joking around trying to scare each other. And Patrick was all quiet and listening. All of a sudden, he says, "Do you remember I told you I used to see fires in my house? See how my mum died?" That was creepy. In the same neighborhood, there is another friend of mine, Tom. Tom's dad was an alcoholic, and you can imagine all the bad things that alcoholism comes with to exist in Tom's life. They were extremely poor. Side note, he's doing great now because he's super dedicated and very humble. But anyway, back then, his dad got diagnosed with tuberculosis. He was hospitalized and things were bad. Now in the apartment below Tom's apartment, there lived a family who had this mentally challenged man who was in his late 40s or early 50s. He wasn't married and rarely left the house. One morning at around 5 a.m., while Tom's father was hospitalized, this old man knocked on Tom's door. Tom opened it groggily, and the man said, "Why aren't you ready yet? Go get ready and visit your dad for the last time." That was the day Tom's father died in the hospital, and he later told me about the incident. Both these stories are so convincing, because I know these guys, and I really don't think they would lie about something as devastating as losing a parent. When I was a little kid, we lived on the outskirts of Jackson, Ohio, out in the middle of the woods. My older brothers would sometimes have to take me out with them when they explored, so that my mum could get some free time. We were going pretty far back one day, following along a dry creek bed, when we came across a deep hole in the middle of the creek, like a sinkhole. My brothers were joking around about having me go in it, when we heard a big tree fall about 1,000 feet off, and then shortly after that, another. We freaked out and ran, assuming Bigfoot was chasing after us or an axe murderer. Now, the memory being in that woods that sticks with me the most isn't necessarily the creepiest, but kind of the most, "What was that?" moment of my life. My friends and I were playing in the woods like usual, climbing a steep hillside that led up to a path we often used. At the bottom of the hillside was a rocky creek bed. The climb was anywhere between 70 to 90 degrees with roots and clay at the height of 150 feet or so. We were climbing, as we usually do. I'm nearly at the top when I lose my balance and start to fall back, at which point I feel a firm hand on my back that helps me regain my balance. Once I make it to the top, I thank whoever it was that helped me stay steady. But my two friends both looked at me as if I were crazy, and said neither of them had done anything. That was by far one of the strangest experiences of my life, and I remember it clearly, some 20+ years later. October 20th, 6 years ago. I came home from class at around 11:30, and no one else was home. I hung out at home for a bit, and at 2:30, I was overcome with sleepiness. Being the bum that I am, I lay down in my bed and set a timer on my phone for a 20-minute nap. I fell asleep quickly, and after around 5 minutes I was awoken in my bedroom to the door opening
and had a split second of a panic before my dog jumped up on my bed and laid down next to me. Then I fell back asleep. After another 5 minutes of sleep, I instantly jolted awake because I was certain that there was someone standing next to my bed behind me. I assumed it was my mother, who would be likely pissed that I was sleeping in the middle of the day. I awoke and turned around in one movement, and there was no one. I checked my phone and had another 8 minutes of sleep. I went back to sleep only to be woken up by my phone ringing. It was my mother. She said that my great-aunt, who had been in the hospital after a stroke-like event for a week, had died at 1 o'clock. My mum then said that she knew my aunt was going to die today because she had seen a wraith, a sort of ghost, a warning that someone was going to die that very morning. My mum is Scottish and very superstitious, but I don't believe any of that. She said that when she woke up in the morning to take my brother to school, she went into my room to see if I was still asleep, and she saw a wraith standing next to my bed. It was at that point my brain crapped itself. This is a creepy story that happened when my friends and I were attempting to go on a paranormal adventure. We'd heard a few rumors about this place out in the middle of nowhere, an abandoned amusement park. They said the amusement park was haunted. Apparently, after it went bust, the owner took his own life by hanging himself from it. Rumors had it that they found his hanging body, lifeless, attached to the Ferris wheel. Apparently, the Ferris wheel will now move by itself at night, so naturally we wanted to see if this was true. One of my friends, who said he can sense the presence of spirits, really wanted to go, but two of my other friends required a bit more persuasion. We wanted to go at night, since it would be creepier that way. We had difficulty finding the location. It truly was in the middle of nowhere. It was in the mountains. I remember as we were driving up that we didn't pass any other cars on the roads. Finally, we found the abandoned amusement park at 2 a.m. I decided to park the car in a nearby hotel parking lot, since the roads to the amusement park were in rather bad shape. We could walk down that desolate road, and it would make the experience all the creepier. I had just parked the car, and everyone was taking their seatbelts off. Then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of knocking on the passenger side window. My friend, who said he could sense the presence of spirits, was sat in the passenger seat of my car. My car, which only moments ago was filled with laughter and excitement, fell silent. It was really eerie. None of us said a word. It was 2 a.m. We were in the middle of the mountains and we hadn't passed anyone on the drive up, and the hotel parking lot was empty. We all knew that it was impossible for a person to knock on the window and run off into the shadows without any of us spotting them. I looked out the window, and there was nothing but darkness all around us. It was awful. The tension was like one of those horror films where you know a jump scare is only seconds away. I was sweating, and didn't want to be the one to break the silence. My friend in the passenger seat just turned to me and said, "Let's get out of here." Just then, another knock came from the rear of the car. I glanced in the mirror and didn't see anything. I thought it could have been a stone hitting the car, but it sounded like a very deliberate knock. I was very, very cautious when I pulled away. I didn't want to get into an accident, and really felt that there was some kind of presence out there just watching us. I drove very carefully until we got to a nearby convenience store. Beneath the lights and in the safety of the convenience store, we all felt less frightened by what had happened, and we began to talk about it. My spiritual friend then said, "That was a warning. Something was out there telling us to turn back for sure. Do not leave the car. I think it's still with us." We drove further and further from those awful mountains, and I don't know how to explain it, but the air in the car shifted. We all felt better, like when you've given your presentation that you've been worried about for ages. It was now behind us. We got out of the car to inspect, and found several scratches on the passenger side door. From that day onwards, we promised to one another that we would not go ghost hunting again, some things don't want to be hunted. Or maybe some things won't be hunted. They'd rather hunt you. I can only imagine what would have happened if we had left that car and gone in search of the amusement park. Our family was visiting London, and we went to check out the Imperial War Museum. It's got some old planes and tanks which our two boys of 6 and 7 at the time wanted to check out. There's a special Holocaust exhibit shown on the 3rd floor of this very large building. Our boys are a bit too young to see it, so I hunker down outside the exhibit with my boys while my husband goes through it. Sitting there trying to keep them entertained, and suddenly my younger says, "Mummy, why is the lady crying?" At first, my older son and I didn't hear it, but then pretty soon all three of us are hearing it, and it's weird, like a high keening. Basically, it sounds ghostly, and it seems to be coming from the exhibit. My younger son is getting very agitated and says, "This lady won't stop crying." The building is an atrium type, so there is a lot of ambient noise. I convince myself the acoustics are making it sound freaky. There were easily 90 to 100 people in this place, and it's loud. Sounds are bouncing off a lot of hard surfaces, but this crying sifts up to the top. As although not constant, I remember so many years later, and it makes my skin crawl. I'm looking around trying to figure out if other people can hear it, but it's a normal day for everyone else. No one else can hear it. We're all very creeped out at the time. My son says he needs to go to the bathroom. We all jump up thinking the same thing. Let's get away from the sound. We hunt for a bathroom on the 3rd floor and flee to this back office, and someone who works there lets us use their non-public bathroom. And mistake. The hair is standing on the back of my neck. It was dense in that room, and we all felt it. Whatever was there was crazy strong, and it was following us. My sons and I leave the room, that floor, and the building as fast as we could. We ran to the main floor and jetted out of there like we were on fire. My husband comes out looking for us, and when we asked what the hell were the crying sounds coming from the Holocaust exhibit, my husband asks, "What crying?" I said that we heard crying coming from the exhibit, and he says that he didn't hear any crying sounds at all. I don't know. We were just glad to be out of there. I go home and for some reason decide to look up the history of the Imperial War Museum building. Apparently, according to Wiki, the museum was acquired as a permanent home that was previously the Bethlehem Royal Hospital in Southwark. I'm sweating cold bullets now. Bethlehem Royal Hospital. This building served as an insane asylum, with some of the most abhorrent and abusive patient conditions ever recorded. The worst of it lasting over a century. My grandpa's death when I was 7 kind of jump-started whatever latent abilities I had, but this was 3 years later when I was 10. Whether animals or people, death has been a constant part in my life. I prefer to think that some of us are made to comfort the dying or the dead. I watched life leave the eyes of my grandpa, many pets and other humans. This particular day was normal for me. It was the weekend and it was nice out. I remember the phone ringing and my mother came out crying. She told me to get into the car, and we drove to my cousin's house. My family that is still living, my father Tom, mother Charlie, son TJ, and daughter Mary. TJ was the oldest child, Mary was around 14, and the dad was a farmer. TJ would go with his dad and work the fields while Charlie and Mary hung out at home. That particular day, while the father and TJ were out farming, a stranger came to the house. He likely walked from the nearby interstate and murdered Charlie, then sexually assaulted Marie before murdering her too. TJ and his dad came home for lunch to find their bodies. The father is my mother's first cousin, and they were very close. My mother's first instinct was to go to the two and try and comfort them. I remember we had to park in the field because the entire property was swarmed with police and tape and emergency vehicles. I rolled my window down a bit, and my mouth instantly tasted like blood. All I could smell was blood. My mum told me it was okay. She just needed to see her cousin and talk about something and that we would go home. She told me that under no circumstances was I to leave the car, and not to talk to anyone, nor leave the car. She even locked the doors. I just remember looking at their lawn covered in lights and tape and cars, as I knew something really bad must have happened. The ambulance hadn't left yet. My mum was hugging her cousin while he sobbed. TJ was being questioned by a policeman, but he was just staring at the front door with a vacant look on his face. I knew this wasn't a good place to be. I kept tasting blood and wanted to leave. I was contemplating opening my door and just running. I don't know where, but somewhere that wasn't here. Then a very kind-looking policeman knocked on my window and asked where my mum was. I told him she was with her cousin, but I wanted to leave. He opened the door and crouched down and spoke with me. As we talked, I calmed down, and the taste of blood was gone. I could no longer see the front door. Any time I would ask about what was going on, the policeman in navy blue would effortlessly change the subject. Eventually, my mum came back to me and he said bye, and we shut the door. Mum then asked me why I had my door open when she specifically told me not to do so. I told her the policeman was talking to me. She said that there were no police people near the car. I thought about it. He opened a locked car door. He was in a navy blue uniform, and our local police wear brown. Days later, I learned that the murderer had killed Charlie in front of the front door. He shot her in the face. Her blood was on the door that the phantom policeman kept me from seeing. The murders were solved 20 years later. Unfortunately, that lowlife had been hitched up and down a small stretch of interstate, raping and killing women. By the time the DNA was analyzed, the sob was dead. Charlie and Mary didn't get justice, and I have no idea who or what that officer was. I know our farming community started getting better locks and more guns. I know there is a memorial bench for them at my school, and honestly, I hope that sad excuse for a human meat stick gets an eternity of suffering. I'm 27 years old now, and it has been a long time since I have stayed overnight at my neighbor's house. Every time I stayed overnight there, I just had a bad feeling. One night when I was 11, it was the Patriots versus Carolina in the Super Bowl. My neighbors hosted a Super Bowl party, and after 10 of us kids were all hanging out and ended up spending the night there. We mostly watched the Puppy Bowl, 'cause we were kids and one kid really loved Brady and made us watch some of the game. The game came and went, and we were all trying to stay up as late as possible since the parents were passed out. Looking back, I realize now they all got super drunk. It must have been about 3 a.m. when all of us kids woke up to a loud crashing like glass breaking in the bathroom. We could clearly see the bathroom from where we were, and all the adults stayed upstairs and had their own bathroom. There was no reason for them to come downstairs and use this one. Additionally, we never saw anyone leave the bathroom in the hour that we sat there and watched the door. In the morning, obviously us kids got up super early because we're kids. We woke up the adults and told them what happened. They didn't believe us, and blamed it on us. It's hard for me to explain. In the bathroom, there is a sink immediately to your right. Above the sink is a mirror, and above the mirror is a shelf with a lip that prevents its contents from slipping off the shelf. When we walked in, one of the big, maybe 1-liter cologne bottles had seemingly been thrown off the shelf above the mirror. It was about 20 feet across the bathroom from that shelf to the tub. All the glass from the cologne bottle was shoved up against the side of the bathtub. No glass was below the shelf. It was as if the bottle had been thrown very hard against the side of the tub and stayed there. There was a window to the side in the bathroom, but it was small enough that a possum couldn't even fit through it. And this wasn't the last time. For example, by the way, this was a year after the events of the previous story. The family went to Panama, and I was asked to take care of their gerbils in the meantime. The first time I ever went over there, the house was empty. It's the first time that I'd ever been in the house, and it was alone. So, they gave me a key for the back. No issue. This was usually the way I would come in anyway, but it's hard to describe verbally. The second I stepped in this house, I got this chilling feeling like I shouldn't be there. To be clear, I had to enter there in order to go through their driveway to get to their garage and go onto their back screened porch and then access the back door. And never once did I get a bad feeling before. This includes in the previous story, no bad feeling, and I had no idea about the history of the house. But when I walked in, the air felt heavy, and every nerve in my body told me to get out. I knew that I had to feed their gerbils, so I forced myself to get the food and water and to just leave. It was such a strong feeling of hate and anger. Apparently not the last owner, but the owner before that had hanged himself in the bathroom I spoke about before. Go figure. Maybe he just didn't like me.
My dad died this past December. We were close, and I am still devastated. Dad was an Air Force officer, avid bird watcher, practical joker, and an amazing cook. He also put black pepper on damn near everything. I went to his farm to hold down there and take care of his dogs and chickens until they could be rehomed. While I was there, my stepbrother came to visit to keep me company for a day, and we lit a fire in the backyard fire pit and cracked a few beers. Half hour into our conversation, a bald eagle buzzed us. This was literally less than 5 feet over our heads. It wasn't going after prey and had no reason to fly that low other than to get a good look at us and let us know it was there. There's no doubt in my mind that was my dad. After my stepbrother left, I was walking in the house. There's a back door that leads straight into the kitchen, with a spice rack next to it. As I'm opening the door, a single container of black pepper flies off the shelf and lands about 4 feet away. There were a bunch of other spices on the shelf that didn't get moved, just the black pepper. I'm convinced that was also Dad. I immediately pour a little bourbon and another and another. That night, I got roaringly drunk. I cried my eyes out, howled at the moon, and screamed in the heavens. Everything I ever wanted to say to my dad, but I didn't get a chance to. I walked into the kitchen the next morning to find one of the mouse traps up on one edge. There's no way that happened naturally. I know my dad heard me, wherever he is. During the clean-out, I pulled my dad's wind-up clock off the wall. This was a clock that my dad had built the casing for, but hadn't worked in several years since my stepmother died. Dad, me, and my brother had all taken a crack at fixing it to no avail. It was a pretty clock, but if it didn't run, it was going to be given to charity. I pulled it off the wall and set it on the front porch, and lo and behold, it starts ticking. My wife's mouth fell open, and that both sent shivers down our spines. It was Dad telling me, "Don't give the clock away," and it now hangs in my house. And finally, after the funeral 6 months after his passing, we returned to the farm to bury his ashes. While packing up and about to leave the following morning, a rooster shows up. It was the exact breed my dad had. It came walking along the street, turned to the center of the long driveway, and walked straight up to the house. There's a section of the front yard where Dad had buried his past dogs. The rooster walks straight up to the gravesite, pecks around for a minute, looks at me, clucks, then turns, walks out the gate and into the cornfield. Dad was the only person within 5 miles that had that breed of chicken, New Hampshire Red. I also think
That was my dad, coming to say hello.
There was a guy who I used to work with called Dan. Dan was a chill guy who everyone got on with, but was a little weird at times. He used to believe in a lot of things: aliens, ghosts, government experiments, the lot. He wasn't religious, but that's besides the point. While messing around at work, he explained stupid things to us about how he's seen spaceships and how all this paranormal stuff happens when he's at home. Some of it is quite ridiculous, but I listen anyway. A few weeks later, he invites me for a round of beers. I was driving, so I couldn't really drink, but I still went over. We get on the subject of ghosts, and he starts explaining things to me, like how he was once eating an apple, and it just exploded as he went to take a bite. I laughed it off, and thought it could have just been some sort of pressure with the way he was holding it, causing it to explode. But he was deadly serious, and pulled out a few pictures of this apple, and started showing me the damage it had done to him. There was a picture of him with a cut on his cheek caused by the apple. However, I was still unconvinced this meant there was a ghost in his house. He wasn't messing around, and told me to hold on, and that he'd show me something. And he pulls out of this shoebox full of pictures from around the house, and just says, "Flick through those, you'll see." With a deep sigh, I say, "Okay." I go through these pictures of a recent Christmas, the usual photos, kids opening presents, the family having Christmas dinner, having a few drinks at night, a group shot. That's when I stop. This was the photo that left me in awe. His family was standing in front of this mirror, and I kid you not, in the reflection of the mirror was an Edwardian girl smiling straight at the camera. This was not one of those could be a smudge type of thing. It was not hidden behind someone can barely make it out either. No. This was a clear, colored, taken photograph, with the girl's reflection being black and white. You could make out her face, her smile, her clothes, her hands, everything. It doesn't end there though. Dan says to me, "Told you I wasn't kidding you." I go to the next photo. Same sort of thing. Family members have moved around and so had the girl. She's doing a different pose. She's smiling now and showing her teeth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was this black and white girl, standing right in the mirror smiling at me, like she'd been there the whole time. I felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice-cold water over me, like I was being watched, like I wasn't welcome anymore and felt like I needed to leave. I put the photos back in the box and left shortly after. I still don't believe in ghosts or aliens or anything like that, but I know what I saw, and I know that it scared the hell out of me. I have had several creepy experiences. I'm going to start from the one when I was in college, in my bedroom. The building was modern, and so I was more caught off guard. I guess you expect ghosts to be chilling in some old stone building and whatnot. I lived in Lincoln, UK, which is a fairly historical city. I was laying in bed at night, grinding shinies on Pokemon Diamond, when out of the corner of my eye I saw movement. I looked up from my white DS, and at the end of my bed was a figure, a woman in all black, just staring. I stared back, silently, my brain frozen over. Without looking away, I felt for the light switch and hit the light. For some reason I assumed that this would make it go away, but it didn't. I shouted, jumped out of bed and ran. My housemates were all awake in the living room, and they were super concerned. We went back to my room and there was nothing there. I got mocked for the rest of the year. Roll on 4 years, I'm living on my own in China, Nanchang. In the winter, it gets cold and lonely. Being the social butterfly that I am, I decided to buy a bird from the old pet market. The guy gave me a fairly good deal on a majestic baggie. I don't know what her English name is. He assured me that I would be able to teach the bird to talk. Lol. It didn't take long for the bird to become used to me, and eventually would happily sit on my head, hand or shoulder, but would never talk. I named it Boromir, after the most important character in Lord of the Rings. As winter went on, things started to get a bit strange. One night I was sitting watching Arrested Development, when all of a sudden the bird began to laugh. Not that weird, right? Everyone laughs at Arrested Development, but this laugh was creepy, and it was high, and then got low. A moment later there was a banging on my door. I opened it and a man started shouting at me. I had no idea what he was saying, and then he barged into my flat. He walked over the balcony, one I had never even bothered to open, and started shouting stuff at me. I walked over, and even though it was locked up, it was flooded. An outside tap was fully turned on, and the water was pouring all down the side of the building. He had to go and get a key. Turns out he was maintenance, opened the balcony and turned the tap off. It took a while as the tap had been twisted so tight it was stuck. In the background, Boromir just laughed. The second time I heard this laugh, I wasn't alone. Another foreign teacher from Holland was sitting with me. We were both drinking whiskey and listening to music, when suddenly the laugh began again. We watched as the knob of the stereo turned on its own, first all the way up, then all the way down. At the time I didn't make a connection with the laughing and the weirdness. We were both pretty unnerved. One night I brought a girl back with me. She was scared of birds, so I put Boromir in his cage and covered it with a thick blanket. We went to bed. I closed the bedroom door and she got a headache, and we went to sleep. I could hear the bird laughing through the cage and through the wooden door. We woke up to banging on the door. This time it was the bedroom door. Someone was in my apartment. The girl started to panic, in ways that only girls do when there's an intruder. So I grabbed something heavy and went over to the door and pulled it open. At first I thought there was no one there. But then I looked down. Boromir was at my feet staring silently. The girl didn't come back. At this point I decided the bird had to go. I put it back in the cage and found a friend who'd said he'd take it. The final night before he left, I was in bed, and I heard the laugh again. It filled me with dread, and waited for something to happen. But nothing did. I fell asleep and woke up in my bedroom to the door slamming. And I woke up. There was someone in my room. She was speaking to me in a very hurried fashion, but there was no sound. She wasn't like the scary Lincoln lady. She was scared. She ran out of my room and I followed, hitting as many light switches as possible, and then she was gone. The birdcage was empty, but I could hear the laughter coming from my bedroom. I went back in, and sitting on the top of the lamp was Boromir. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I took him to my friend's place. I had told him everything honestly, as I'm not that much of an idiot, but he was still eager to have the bird. And this is the part of the story that seems the most far-fetched, but I swear down it happened. I gave the bird to my friend, and as I was about to leave, a little voice in my head said, "I miss you." In the end, the bird escaped from my friend's house a few months after that, and was never heard from again. Probably for the best. For quite a while, I've been aware of a ghost in my room. I feel a depression on the edge of my bed at night, like someone is sitting down on it. Once it tucked me in. That was the weirdest part, I think. It felt very strange. My Xbox turns on and starts playing Skyrim in the middle of the night. Then there was the picture of me sleeping shot on my phone from an angle that I would not have been able to take it at from myself. The room is always completely locked, doors, windows, everything. At least, it's not an angry ghost. Feels more maternal than anything. This takes place circa 2003, California, USA. I was around 16 years old, and we had just moved into a new apartment with my mother, younger brother, and older brother. My parents had recently separated, and things were still rocky for everyone, considering my father had actually filed for a divorce without my mother knowing. She had moved to Florida with some family while she got on her feet. So my father handled the whole thing fraudulently and basically kept everything for himself and left my mother with nothing. So there was so much bad blood between them when she returned and became aware of everything he did. Both of my parents are from Mexico, and my mother has no experience with law and procedures, but also had no will to seek legal counsel and have the divorce reversed or to have my father prosecuted for fraud and forgery. Instead, she decided to do what most Hispanic women do, which is seek spiritual counsel from a witch to cast spells on my father, which at one point she sought my own personal approval, which I declined, and was angry at the fact that she would even ask me. I did not think she would actually pull a stunt like that, because prior to the whole separation, she was a devout Jehovah's Witness. But I soon learnt that she had transformed into a completely different person from the time she had left to Florida to the time that she had come back. Some time passed after she asked me about having my father cursed, and I completely forgot about it. That's when I began to have a series of sleep paralysis, which was the typical ones which can be dismissed as just that, until the next two incidents. One day during the summer, it was a hot Sunday, just really boring, so I decided to take a cat nap, and I dreamt that I was about to walk out the front door, and my mother was sleeping on the couch, and suddenly, a shadow figure appeared in between myself and my mother, and I could no longer move, but could see a tall shadow from the corner of my eye when I awoke. Frightened, I ran to the living room to see my mother rising up from the couch with a scared look on her face, and she told me she had a bad dream with the same exact scenario that I had had at that very moment. A few days later one night, I had a dream of a teenage boy about my age, just a randomer, appearing in my dream when I was with a group of friends, and he appeared out of thin air, and we all wondered who he was and where he'd come from. On the same night, I slipped into another dream, this time with the same boy. Only this time, he and I were walking through an empty home, and he was giving me a tour through the house, describing his family and siblings, when suddenly I awoke. My thoughts were that he was a departed soul, perhaps just passing through, and so I thought to myself maybe I should pray, and he wouldn't bother me anymore. And just before I began to pray, I was suddenly gripped by the neck and pinned down. I didn't see anything, but I heard a loud, shrieking whisper in my ear that said, "Shut up." Then I was let go. I shared this incident with a friend of the family, plus the sleep paralysis, and he responded by telling me that the word going around is that your mum is visiting a black magic practitioner to put a curse on your dad, and that perhaps something is attaching to us. I didn't really take it too seriously until the day I was getting my mother's car keys from her purse and found a business card from a witch. I later confronted her about it. I was so angry because of the sleep paralysis became so frequent, and she never responded and just looked away. Even one night when my girlfriend decided to spend the night, she was aware of my sleep paralysis and that it was normal. Now that I knew when I would have those troubling nights, even before going to bed, I would get this rush and feel a slight vertigo, and she would stay awake so that she could wake me up when she saw me squirming. We slept in the living room, and my mother had an obsession with dolls, and my girlfriend didn't tell me right away, but later she admitted on that night she stayed over. She saw one of the doll's heads spin a full 360. Despite having a comfy flight from Manila to Sydney, I still felt tired. After passing through immigration, I immediately went to the arrival hall, loaded my Opal card, and then rode a train to my mate's flat to Burwood. It was raining when I arrived in Sydney, at only 18 degrees. The warm shower and the bed were the only two things I looked forward to. It was still raining when I woke up. The overcast weather made the day bleak and gloomy. Then I remembered the things I watched online a few days ago, and one of them were the ghost tours of Sydney. I asked my mate about it, and the next thing I knew, he already booked us an extreme ghost tour on the weekend after my trip to Melbourne. Sydney was not a glamorous city back in the 19th century. Diseases such as smallpox, Spanish influenza, and bubonic plague were prevalent. To mitigate the spread of these infectious diseases, all ships entering Sydney's harbour must be checked by the doctor. Even if there was only one sick passenger aboard, everyone was required to stay at the quarantine station for 40 days. Those who were sick were brought to the hospital for treatment. And at least 1,600 people were brought here from 1830 to 1984. And a total of 570 people have perished there. Today, Q Station serves as a hotel, a conference centre, and part of a Sydney Harbour National Park. Our extreme ghost tour was scheduled to start at around 9 p.m. to beat the weekend traffic of North Sydney. We left Burwood at around 6 and drove all the way to Manly. We had our dinner there just before heading to Q Station, located east of Manly Beach. We arrived at 8:30, way too early for the tour, so we went straight to the front desk and toured around. Some of the original relics like tombstones, luggage, and clothes are still there. It felt eerie upon seeing those personal belongings who once belonged to people who got quarantined here over 100 years ago. We met up with the group at 9:30. Our guide, Bob, told us we should not rationalize everything we see during the tour. Jason and I are both air traffic controllers, and in our work we rationalize everything. This time, we have to leave everything behind and open up our senses. We were given EMF sensors, the instrument that are used to detect anomalies in the surrounding electromagnetic field. The experts believe that ghosts manifest themselves as this form of energy. Our first stop was the chamber. There are 2 rooms, both that are not big, with a floor area of approximately 50 square meters. We were locked inside for at least 5 minutes just to observe everything. I didn't feel anything in the first room, except that it faintly smelt of hay. I didn't mind, because I thought it used to be a barn. But in the second room I felt something. The surrounding air felt heavy. I felt like an unknown force pressing my cheeks. It was quite difficult to breathe at some point. As we were out, Bob told us that it used to be a gas chamber and that about 40 people were locked inside for sanitary reasons. Now it all made sense why we felt heavy inside and why I felt claustrophobia inside the room. Our second stop was the hospital. It was quite a long hike to the quarantine hospital, and during the early days it was harder to get to. You needed to climb the steep walkways. Basically, when you're on top, you're completely isolated. The hospital is located near the cliff overlooking Sydney Harbour. There are several buildings around, including the quarters of the nurses and doctors. Hospitals, no matter how modern their facilities are, can get creepy at night, but this one was way creepier than I thought. We first entered the doctor's quarter. It was dark but cold inside the room, and there were 3 bunk beds in it. As I sat and leaned on the lower bunk while listening to Bob's stories, I felt something was pinching my lower back. I shrieked and Bob caught my attention. I told Bob it was nothing. We went into the main hospital room. It was quite big and there were 6 beds. Feeling brave, I lied down on one of the beds and tried to make some connections. I don't know how, I just closed my eyes and felt nothing. And honestly, the bed felt so soft and comfortable. I transferred to an adjacent bed near the wall, and the moment I lied down, it felt weird. It felt like something was pushing me, but not in a forceful manner. The room is connected to another room that had a darker history. Bob told us to open the door, and asked if we felt something different. Everyone told him that it was colder in the room despite the doors and windows being tightly shut. Some of our EMF detectors went crazy. According to Bob, there are 4 resident ghosts inside this room. 2 children who love to play hide and seek, and a woman, as well as a malevolent spirit of an old man. There were stories circulating that one group who stayed overnight in the hospital decided to record themselves singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and caught something in the recording. They heard children giggling, and a woman saying, "Wait, wait," and an angry voice of a male shouting to get out. Jace had his EMF detector pointed near the cupboard and it went crazy. So what he did? He went and got his smartphone and started recording himself singing the same song. Actually, we were all at the center of the room and didn't hear him singing. After we went out, we played his recording, and believe it or not, he caught something. There weren't disembodied voices from the children or from the woman, but in the middle of his singing, someone was shouting in the background, "Your singing stinks!" The third stop was the gravedigger's house. It apparently was one of the most haunted parts of the complex. It's so haunted that Bob won't dig deeper into its bloody history. It used to be the house of the gravedigger and the doctor. Just a few steps from the house is the third-class cabin. During that time, there were reports of missing girls and children. Eyewitness reports claimed they saw some kids and girls entering the gravedigger's house. More so, the doctor was attached to the girls, especially the young ones. The house is a bungalow, which has 2 bedrooms with a small living room, dining room, and the kitchen and bathroom are both located at the back part of the house. Bob left us there for 10 minutes. The first room to the right used to be the bedroom of a pedophile doctor. As I slowly entered the room, the atmosphere drastically changed. It felt cold and sad at the same time. I don't know. I can't help but be sad in that room. I went out right away because I could no longer take the sadness. The second room was rather weird. I was about to enter there, but something felt wrong. It's like there's a force barring me from entering the room. Some of my group mates checked their EMF and it went crazy. I guess everyone was not welcome inside. The back portion where the kitchen and bathroom are located was the scariest part of the house. It was dark, but that part of the house was faintly illuminated by the moon outside. I stayed there for at least 3 minutes to just observe, and I suddenly felt goosebumps all over my body. As I neared the bathroom, it felt sinister, and I didn't go inside because my instincts told me not to. I managed to take photos inside the house, and my phone didn't catch anything paranormal, but all photos are creepy as hell. When everyone was outside, Bob confessed that the bathroom was the most haunted part of the house. Locals claimed that a girl was brutally murdered inside the bathroom. She got strangled by barbed wire. The fourth stop was the morgue. I never liked going to a morgue anyway, especially a dark and abandoned one. I was very nervous the moment we entered. To add to the scare factor, a mannequin lying at the center covered with a white cloth. I know it's staged, but it still scared the hell out of me. While Bob was talking about its history, it started getting cold, but weirdly only on my right side. No one was standing to my right, and there was nothing but a door leading to the laboratory. A cold breeze passed through. I wasn't paying attention to Bob's story because I felt someone standing near me. I whispered to Jace about it, and he scanned his EMF, and suddenly there was a spike of energy. He told me to calm down, but I was this close to breaking down. As minutes went by, I started to feel goosebumps on my right arm, and I can feel that someone is actually touching it. It was like a gentle caress, but definitely not human. I became uneasy after we went out the morgue, and Bob noticed it. He smiled and said, "There isn't a ghost like you, did he?" Really, Bob. The next stop was the shower block. It is the most haunted place in the whole of Q Station. During the time that those who are sick must take a shower of carbonic acid, not water. The acid kills fleas and ticks in seconds, and 2 days after your skin starts to peel off. It was dark and eerie as we entered the shower block. The stench was still there, and I felt lightheaded. The same feeling when you get out of a boat ride. Bob told us that there are shadows lurking around the dark corners, and for 15 minutes we were instructed to roam around and observe. He told us to go to the corners where we felt the most uncomfortable. I had goosebumps as we passed by the center aisle and turned right since we both felt uneasy on this side. As we were walking back to the center aisle, I felt someone watching us from behind, so instinctively we turned our heads slowly and saw a dark figure peering from the corner of the block. I am pretty much sure that my friend wasn't playing tricks on me. The figure was tall, about 7 feet tall, and it was darker than dark. And all of a sudden the figure came right after us. I don't know what happened next, but Jason and I were back at the main door of the block in a jiffy. Whatever that is, it scared the hell out of me. The tour lasted for 3 hours, and was already half midnight when we went back to the parking lot safe and sound. I honestly don't know what to feel after the tour. I was physically and mentally exhausted. Nonetheless, it was still a great experience. It finally validated that I am a bit sensitive to the paranormal. I do believe in ghosts, and don't easily get scared by them. But my experience at Q Station was overwhelming. A lot can happen in 3 hours.
Once upon a time, I lived on South Beach, Miami, and worked at a local alternative clothing store right on the main strip. One day in the middle of summer, I was at work with just the store owner with me there. It was slow season and the customers were scarce. So she made herself busy dressing mannequins on one side of the store while I sat folding shirts behind a display case on the other side. It was boring to say the least, but at one point the owner interrupted me to ask if I had seen her kids come through. They lived upstairs, so this would not have been unusual. However, I had not, and told her so. When I asked why, she said she could have sworn she heard some kids laughing and talking somewhere in the store, but I hadn't heard a damn thing. So she went back to her task, obviously confused. I resumed work folding the clothes and thought nothing more of it. All was quiet and completely unremarkable for the next 10 or so minutes, until a sudden movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I then turned to look just in time to see my bottle of vitamin water launch itself from where it was sitting on top of the display case, slam into the wall 5 feet behind, and spill all over the floor. No joke. That bottle flew into the wall like it had been struck by a baseball bat hard enough to get a home run. I say that I was perplexed, and that's an understatement. I sat there frozen and stared at the mess as I struggled to comprehend what and how it happened. I would have been able to see someone if they'd have thrown it, and no one was around, not a soul. But it wasn't physically possible, right? My brain felt like it was going to short circuit. A few moments later, I was still staring stupidly at the mess when the owner walked up to check on me. "Is everything all right?" she asked when she saw what happened. I didn't know what to say, but I think I mumbled something about the bottle getting knocked off the counter, and I told her I would clean it up right away. Satisfied but still confused, she shrugged and walked away. Now this is where it gets really wild. If you've ever seen a vitamin water cap before, you know it's made of quite hard, thick plastic that is nearly impossible to break without some sort of tool. So whatever quantum force decided to make an example out of my bottle that day must have been especially powerful, because the impact it had made against the wall split the cap clean through the center, sending both pieces flying in opposite directions before they hit the floor. I'm just glad I wasn't in the way. So take it from me, poltergeists don't mess around.
Some years back, I was at university with a friend I'd known from school. We weren't best friends, but good mates. We'd known about each other and got on well enough. I knew that he was a spiritualist, and he'd sometimes talk about his spiritual guide and whatnot. Not really what I believe in, but each to their own. Anyway, we were both hanging around the halls of residence where I lived, as he lived in another hall, wasting time and watching crap on the tiny TV in the shared kitchen. We were waiting until 2 a.m, as that's when WWE, or WWF as it was called then, would be showing. As we didn't have Sky, or cable for our American friends, we would often wait up in the halls, then walk down to the local 24-hour snooker/pool hall, which would show Sky Sports. Usually you could ask them to stick the wrestling on and turn the volume up. We're chatting a lot of rubbish and just watching stupid stuff on the TV. Can't remember what we were talking about, but I remember after that, it wasn't anything creepy. We hadn't been drinking or anything either, and were all completely sober. We're chatting away when we realize we need to get down to the pool hall if we want to catch the wrestling. So we stick on our coats and continue our conversation as we're walking outside. Now it's the weirdest thing. The moment I walk through the door, I feel cold. Bear in mind it's 2 a.m. This is England. Sometime in the spring, so it wasn't going to be warm out, but I mean, it's like I had chills running up and down my spine. Cliché? Perhaps. But the best way I can describe it is the slow feeling of creeping dread you get when you're watching some scary movie and the ominous music starts to play. I tried to shrug it off, but it's like the dread was increasing with each step down the street. The air actually felt heavy, like it was difficult to breathe. I know it sounds like any other creepypasta story, but it's the only way I know how to describe that horrible feeling in my gut. A minute out the door, I suddenly realized we were both silent. We were chatting and laughing as we left the halls, but our conversation seemed to have just faded out of existence. I remember looking down the street, thinking that perhaps this was me being nervous about any dodgy characters nearby, but the road was clear. It was a clear night, nothing out of the ordinary at all. But to me, there was this massive alarm going off in my head. I was terrified of something, and I didn't know what. Picking up on the silence finally, I simply said, air feels a little thick tonight. My throat was dry at this point. He looked at me with a pale face and said, "Oh God, you can feel it too." We managed to hold a halting conversation about what it could be, but it was difficult as we both felt sick to our stomachs. Finally, as we crossed the road, I remember my friend turning even more white and saying, "It's death. Death is here." I don't really remember much after we crossed the road. Weirdly, the strange feeling suddenly subsided and we both laughed it off, even though we'd both felt it. We made it to the pool hall, and I didn't think much of it for a few days. It wasn't until later in the week that I was walking from uni without my friend that I passed a building close to the halls on the road we'd crossed over where my friend had felt death. There were 3 police cars and an ambulance there. I remember watching in horror as a pair of coroners were removing a body wrapped up in black. We looked it up in the local paper the next day. Apparently, 3 homeless people had died together in the building after seeking shelter, and they'd been dead for a few days before being discovered and removed. Never did find out what they died of, and we didn't go see much wrestling after that. 2 years ago, my family had our first Christmas at my grandmother's house, since my great-grandfather had passed away. There was a definite somber tone to the otherwise festive gathering, as he was a big part of our family get-togethers. Fast forward a few hours into night, my uncle, who was a bit of a disturber with a twisted sense of humor, started poking fun at silly things my great-grandfather used to do. It began harmless, but of course he took it way too far and started making fun of pretty rude things, like the fact he had a hard time chewing his food near the end of his life. Pretty horrible, I know. As soon as the statement left his mouth, the craziest thing I've ever experienced happened. My grandmother has a bookshelf in the living room where we were all situated in. One of the shelves, the second one from the top, was almost a mini shrine to him. Well, everything on that shelf went flying off, literally shot across the room and fell to the floor, as if someone had thrown it. The weirdest thing was nothing on any of the other shelves were touched, just the stuff on the one dedicated to him. No one was beside the shelf and there were no windows open. Needless to say, my uncle was scared and bolted out of the room as we were all stunned. I have no logical explanation for what happened that night, but we do like to say it was our grandfather telling my uncle to smarten up one last time. Around the time I was 8, I lived in a trailer house at the end of the road. So everything was on one floor: living room, kitchen, my parents' room and my bedroom in the other half of the house. But there was an extra bedroom built to the side of the trailer, which was my older sister's room. So when we first moved in, I got some creepy vibes from the house, especially from my room. So that is when I wanted to sleep in my sister's room. Mind you, me and my sister are 7 years apart, and we did not get along until I was 15. So obviously she wasn't really happy about that, but I didn't care. I was always afraid of the dark and being alone. At first I didn't experience anything paranormal. I did things that I've never done before, like sleepwalk. My sister would tell me she would just see me get up, stand there for a while, sit, maybe lay back down and even pee the bed. I would often wake up on the floor. Months later, I would start experiencing paranormal occurrences. The first time I was sound asleep, but for some reason I opened my eyes and saw a boy standing there. He had a grey and blue aura around him, like the ghosts do in cartoons. So since I was a scaredy cat, I ran to my parents' room and cried. After that, I decided to move out of my sister's room and into the room that was supposed to be mine since we moved in. This room was the only room in the house I didn't like to be in alone, after the things that happened, and it was always the coldest room. So my room had a whole wall of a sliding door closet, and it was wood. I would often hear tapping in the night from the closet, and I would tell my sister, but she would just tell me it was because the wood was growing. I wasn't the brightest when I was little, so I brushed it off and the tapping kept happening every other night. But one night I heard a whisper clear as day telling me to turn around. I started crying from fear and wanted to yell for my mum and dad, but I couldn't. Then the last night I slept there, I had sleep paralysis. It was the first and last time I had it. I saw a tall, pure black figure just standing at my door staring at me. And since when you have sleep paralysis you can't move or speak at all, I tried yelling for my mum, and just a gasp would leave my mouth. I don't exactly remember how I came out of it, but I ended up sleeping in the living room for the next few months. More experiences have happened, like my mum would work night shifts, so I would often sleep with my dad, and I would always wake up in the middle of the night because I would feel a big ball of pressure on me and wouldn't be able to speak. But my dad did wake up from my gasps. Another time I was in my parents' room just watching TV while my sister was in hers. Earlier that day, my mum had bought me some cookies and put them in a beautiful glass bowl. My parents left me and my sister, so we decided to put the bowl on the fridge where I couldn't reach it to grab more. I was in my parents' house, which is next to the kitchen, and the bowl just flew off the fridge. My sister came out of her room and began yelling at me. She accused me of trying to grab some or jumping off the bed. I was so chubby, she would have heard me jumping. That's when she was yelling at me, and you had to wind it to play a song that happened to be in the living room next to the TV. But it was at this exact moment that it began to play while both of us were arguing. My sister and I both freaked out and ran to her room and locked ourselves in there until our parents returned. Other little things still happened afterwards, like some of my things disappearing. I also got a puppy that stayed with me all the time called Marley. He would often bark at the room, but I decided that I felt safe with him and me, and he slept in my room till we moved out. He is my best friend till this day, and I'm 21 now. Also, in case you're wondering why I never mentioned telling my parents or sister of my experiences, My mum being the only devoted Christian at the time, my dad being a skeptic, and my sister who was an emo kid and a teenager. I never had anyone to talk about my experiences with until recently, when I told my sister and she was shocked on why I told her. Well, like I said, we never got along until I was 15, and I sure was an annoying little sister. I also told my parents too, but who knows if they actually believe me or think it was just my childhood imagination. But I never watched scary movies until we moved, and now they're my favorite. I never got to know the new owners, and I've wondered if they've ever had experiences like that. We moved to 3 different houses since then, and I never experienced anything remotely paranormal again in my more recent ones. I've lived in this last one with my 3 dogs, including Marley. One last thing. I rarely have nightmares, but when I do, it's always set in that house and in my old room. One of them was me walking down the road at night and looking at my bedroom window, and the closet door would open, and there would be a decapitated head of a man, just there, staring right at me. When I was between the ages of 11 and 12, I was staying at my father's house, which my little brother and I did every other weekend as our parents were separated. I remember experiencing my first and only spout of sleep paralysis the weekend before. I wasn't able to move, complete fear consuming every part of my soul. I did the toe curls and finger wiggles to get myself out, but never once opened my eyes because I was afraid, and had never experienced seeing anything during that time. However, this weekend, that I had the previous experience completely out of my mind, I figured it was just a nightmare, you know? So it was a normal night and we went to bed around 10:30. The same routine, and the same kind of setting with nothing out of the ordinary. I wake up like normal, but early, at around 6 a.m. on this Saturday. The sun rose and I remember the room completely lit with the sunshine, but I knew it was early, and I was on the bottom bunk of a bunk bed with my little brother on top. I woke up and was wide awake. I felt completely rested and amazing. Something us adults don't truly experience anymore, sadly. It was one of those wake-ups where you stretch and smile, like you're in a complete state of satisfaction. I do so and then relax, with a good feeling flowing through me. We had a large box TV in our bedroom that was about 6 feet away from me on a TV stand, and in the middle of the TV was an inch or 2 above my eye level when laying on the bed. In the middle of my blissful relaxed state, I turn my head casually and look at the shut-off TV that sat before me. I could almost see the entire room. Like I said, the TV was big, but the first thing that caught my eye was the thing that almost gave me a heart attack. What I saw was something very tall, naked, leaning its head over the bars of the bunk bed ladder. It was directly above me, and only inches away from the top of my head. It was crouched over with its head just above mine and looking down at me. It did, and still does to this day, remind me of the aliens from the movie The Signs. I mostly died right then and there. My heart has never dropped so hard into an adrenaline beat. I'm not even sure if I was breathing. I was a very smart kid and did the only thing I thought was best at the time, with the pounding of my chest increasing at a rate faster than anything considered alive. I played like I didn't see it, slowly rolled over and casually grabbed my blanket to cover my head. I figured if I didn't know it was there, it couldn't get me. I lay there with my heart beating out of my chest for probably an hour and a half until I grew the courage, ripped the blankets off, and flipped over to meet it face to face. But it was gone. I've never forgotten it, never tried to forget it, never tried to disprove it. The only thing I've ever done is accept it. What I saw was real, in my room, and I probably stared at it in shock for over 20 seconds, not in disbelief, but in complete and traumatizing fear. I went from ecstasy and complete satisfaction to the most fearful I've ever been in my entire life. If you want to know what I think, it was that the thing fed off fear. It allowed me to feel beyond great in order for me to produce the thickest amount of solid fear anyone can make, and that's exactly what it got. About 20 years ago, I went to visit a relative who had just moved to our town. She invited me into her kitchen for tea. We sat at a little table in the corner, but at one point she left the room to go and get something. I don't remember what. I glanced over to the other side of the kitchen and saw a man hanging by the neck over the stove from one of those plant hanger hooks. Moments later she returned and just said, not sure how you're going to feel about this, but I just saw a man hanging by the neck over there, and pointed to the stove. She asked, what did he look like? He had dirty blonde hair and moustache, and wore a brown flannel shirt. She went white. After a minute of her just staring at me, she said, no one out here knows this, but the reason we moved from New York was because our roommate hung himself in our basement, and he looked like the man you just described. I also have another story. Early morning Thanksgiving 6 years ago, I was taking the turkey into a large roasting pan to my cousin's house so that she could cook it in her oven, because I had other baking to do and they had 2 ovens. Their house was and is at least 100 years old. When you enter the house through the front door, you can either go straight through a hallway to the kitchen or turn right to go into the living room. Off of the hallway to the kitchen there is a small bathroom with a door that opens out into the hallway. So my cousin's husband opens the front door and instead of taking the roasting pan from me, hurries to the hallway to shut the bathroom door that someone had left open. He steps into the bathroom and pulls the door closed so that I could make it through to the kitchen. As he's in the bathroom and I'm carrying an even heavier roasting pan, I feel an enormous amount of energy rush through my body, from behind me, through the front of me. And then I saw a very large man with dark, salt and pepper hair stomp away from me and go through the swinging door to the side dining room. I hurried to set the roasting pan down, and then went to the still swinging door to look in the dining room to see what the hell just happened. When I pushed the door open and looked in the dining room, there was dead silence and I was stunned. I turned back around and my cousin's husband was walking into the kitchen and said, "Did you see that?" His face was deadly serious. All he said was, "I don't want to talk about it." And they moved to another house a year or so later. My final story goes like this. I had come home from work for lunch. It's a 5-minute drive, and afterwards I was driving back to work but had to take a different route than usual, right past a very large and beautiful cemetery. The street is divided, one with large trees in the median, so I pulled out and turned left. There wasn't any traffic. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I've driven down that road about 10 yards, no traffic, no parked cars, when I looked out the passenger window and suddenly see a young man sitting there on the curb. He's wearing long jean shorts, a red t-shirt and a baseball cap, and he's sitting on the curb as if he's waiting for someone. It surprised me so much because I hadn't seen him when I looked, and I should have seen him. So when I passed him, I looked in my rearview mirror, but then there was no one. I pulled over and actually did a double take, and actually got out, and there was still no one there. Fairly sure he was a ghost. When I was in college, it was the height of all the ghost hunting shows. I was always really interested in the possibility of it all since I was a kid. I didn't know if I believed in it or not. I just liked the idea of investigating it all. So I began doing research. I read books, watched documentaries, and studied different techniques. The more and more I learned, the more I realized that going into a situation looking for ghosts or spirits will completely ruin an investigation. What tends to happen with this mentality is that your brain starts finding things that aren't there. So I started to train myself to go into situations as a skeptic, and instead of looking for the paranormal, it was better to look for normal explanations for the abnormal. While doing this, I've met people from all walks of life who also adopted this method. We eventually made a club in our university that actually became the most active and sought-after club to be a part of. We were invited to houses, businesses, and historic parts, Gettysburg namely,
to see what explanations and evidence we could find. We would handpick teams for special investigations if we considered them serious. We did this because the club was open enrollment, and while we could take days to have fresher courses or do and don'ts during investigations, there would still be people looking to find ghosts. Out of all the investigations we did, we had 3 places we went to that we could not explain what we had captured on video and sound. One was a theatre in our home city. The entire night we caught nothing and thought it was a bust. Even going through evidence, which we would do 3 times, provided almost nothing. Until a co-investigator's mother walked through the room where we were watching a tape of the entire theatre and said, "Who the hell's up there?" We made her show us. In the balcony seats, which were locked that night, and we were not allowed up there because of the antiques in it, there was a lamp lit behind a window curtain. You could see a figure move in front of the light of the lamp to almost block it completely. Similarly, as if you were to put a white sheet in front of a light to deaden the intensity of it. And then you could see something pull back the curtain a little bit, as if it were peeking out. The whole thing lasted about 15 seconds. We checked our records of where each group was at the time and asked each person if they had been in the balcony. All responded no. We then asked our guide, who would unlock and lock the sections where we were investigating, to which she responds that she did not have a key to the balcony because of what was inside them. Regardless, she was with my group at the time of the event, and every other person at the investigation was accounted for, because we were able to match up timestamps from their recordings. The second is Gettysburg. There were 3 instances at Gettysburg that were unexplainable. This evidence has been lost because we did this investigation close to 7 years ago, when we were less organized. The first was a picture, one of the best I've seen. There were actually 3 pictures that ran together. The first 2 being just fog that seemed to have a blue hue to it, and the last one sending chills down my spine, because it was a clear as day man, lying on a rock at Devil's Den, looking at Little Round Top from the bottom, dressed in full Confederate garb. When first looking at it, it looked like the picture was distorted, until you realize you can make out the whiskers in his beard and the gold in his patches on his hat and arms of his coat. The second, which I was not there for, was supposedly a piece of paper that was put on a rock in the woods that said, "What's your name?" They walked back about 40 feet or so and recorded and watched for half hour to make sure it wasn't tampered with. When they went back, there were clearly scribbles on the paper, but it wasn't anything legible. The third and final Gettysburg story is when I was walking through an area between the wheat field and Cemetery Ridge. I was with 2 or 3 others, and we had about 10 feet between us as we walked in line. This is all on digital record. You can hear something hit me in the back, like if someone threw a rock or something, and I stopped and said, "Ouch, Joe, what the hell, dude?" To which he says, he didn't do anything. At the time this happened, we were all stopped, and throughout the recording you can hear us all go silent, and in the distance hear a drum play a few beats. We didn't hear this at the time. We were stopped until we listened to the recording later, but Joe was mentioned previously as a drummer, and went white when he heard it. He listened a few more times before telling us it was a halt from a drum line. The third one is very lengthy, and I feel like I want to save it for another day. I do not currently do these investigations, and I'll be the first one in the room to be a skeptic with any paranormal claim, but there were a few times that I was stumped. I'm not saying I know if ghosts exist or not. I don't have that answer.
I can, however, say that there are things in this world we do not understand. Throughout the years we did the club in the university, we became highly recognized, having been given awards from the school for what we have done in our investigations, tactics, and also community and charitable work. Doing investigations are absolutely not what you see on TV. They are much more boring, and you seldom have anything happen. But it's a labor of love. It's hard to explain, because once you find that one piece of footage you can't explain, you want more. I know I'll get backlash from these claims. I always do when I post my experiences, but I promise on my parents' lives that what I say I did indeed happen. I have not tried to emphasize any of it, and I have told these stories as they happened. When I was 13, I woke up one night to the sound of children laughing out my window. I had an 11-year-old brother who had friends next door, so I thought nothing of it. It happened a couple of nights in a row, and so I told my little brother to knock it off, or I'd go all big brother on him and noogie him or something. He gave me poker face and said he could hear them too, but I figured he was being a dork. That night I heard it again. I got up and opened the window to yell at him and his friends, and all I saw out of my window was the darkest, blackest silhouette I've ever seen. There were 4 or 5 of them, about the size of a toddler. As soon as I screamed, they vanished. Dad went outside to see if he could see anything. Of course he didn't. I heard them twice since then. The first time I bailed and slept in the living room. The second time I got balls enough to look outside again, and they were there. I went to a 70s horror movie preacher and held up a Bible and screamed, "In the name of the Father and the Son, I command you to leave and never return." And they never did. I'm guessing it's because they were too busy laughing at me somewhere else. A few months ago, I heard a strange howling outside. It was the middle of the night. I thought I was hearing the TV upstairs until my grandfather texted me asking what was going on outside. So I grabbed my shotgun and flashlight and went out. It's hard to explain the layout of my property, but when I walked through the door, I walked up the balcony, down the stairs, and across the old volleyball court. It was silent until I got to the edge of where it turns into a steep hill that goes straight down to the beach. That's when the howling started again. I wasn't that scared at first because I thought it might have been a sea lion. They can make weird sounds that almost sound human. So I started walking down the trail that leads from the court to the ocean. I was more or less excited because there has never been any sea lions in the cove where I live, but they are known to be around the area. I got to like the first quarter of the trail, which opens up to a flat spot where we have a few burn barrels and a bone pile, various things to trip over. I was about 60 yards from the house when I heard something sprinting up the trail. I got super spooked at that point and raised my gun up. The sprinting stopped, and I could hear noises moving away from me. This was the longest walk back to the house of my life. I literally inched back to my house, still facing the beach the entire time. When I got back, it started back up again, but it stopped soon after. That was night 1. Almost a week went by and the howling began again around the same time, and I had about the same response: shotgun and flashlight outside. I flashed the light around trying to see anything, but it was too dark, and I tried pulling out my phone to take a video, but the howling stopped, so I went back in. The next night I was out with my dog, and he began growling at the trail, and he slowly started walking towards whatever he was looking at. I heard walking down the trail, then something thumping, almost like someone was trying to get to me and my dog to follow me down the beach. I don't use that trail often, if ever. But when I went to the trail the following morning to look, something had definitely been walking through it. So I borrowed some trail cams from my buddy and set them up on the trail in my house to see if I could catch something. And the next day the cams were gone. The day after that the howling started again. It's like whoever was doing it was trying to get me to the beach. A week goes by. Nothing. Then in the middle of the night I hear what I thought was the wind knocking things around, and the next morning nothing is out of place except muddy smudges on both door window and doorknob, and the window next to my bedroom. The next night is a snowstorm, and I hadn't seen or heard anything, almost like whoever they are doesn't want to leave behind footprints. Am I overreacting? Could it have been a bear? I hope so. I'm not much a believer in the supernatural, but I need an explanation. I woke up to my dog jumping off the foot of my bed when he was sleeping and lightly barking. The way he alerts the house is if he hears people in the lawn or otherwise suspects intruders. He's a good guard dog. I'm still a little out of it when this happened, so the ghostly sound sort of passes me for a bit while I try to calm the dog down. But then I start to hear it. A very rhythmic, loud inhale right beside my bedroom window. No exhales, just inhales, over and over and over. I'm frozen in place in my bed, and I do a reality check since I'm no stranger to sleep paralysis. That's how strange this experience was. My mind immediately went to, I'm not even awake, this isn't real. But alas, I was, and I am writing this, and it's only been 10 minutes. The sounds went on for maybe 2 minutes from the moment I woke up. No idea how long they were going for before that, but probably not long since my dog alerted them so strongly when he initially noticed them. Then they just stopped. My dog laid down on the foot of my bed, seemingly telling me that the danger was over. But God, it was so incredibly close to my window. If it was some sort of machinery in the house, which I want to believe, and it is the only logical reasoning I can come up with at the moment, the next issue becoming identifying what type of machinery sounds so similar to a person inhaling rhythmically, not to mention the location of where it happened. Let me clarify, my bedroom is on the 2nd floor, so we can all collectively rule out the possibility of there being a human person standing outside my window. It was a Sunday, early afternoon. The family had gone to church, and I stayed at home as I'm an agnostic and hate church. I was sitting in my bedroom fiddling with something. I can't recall what I was doing exactly when out of the corner of my eye I saw a creature. That's the best thing I can describe it. It looked like a small demon. It ran across my room towards the door. This happened within a fraction of a second, but the fear that ran through my body was intense. I'm just getting chills now remembering it. I quickly ran down the stairs to the closet, grabbed a baseball bat, and sat on the couch in the living room while waiting for my family to return. When they did, I slid the bat under the couch and made no mention of the event to my family. The best description I can give the creature is the resemblance of the Warlock Imp in WoW. Very small, very fast. Bear in mind this was several years before WoW even existed. I'm just giving you an idea of what it was that I saw. When I was a kid, a bunch of strange crap would happen, but my parents would lie as not to alert me. That didn't stop them from telling me when I was old enough, though. One particular occurrence was that almost every night there would seem to be someone who went down to our hall and would seem to toggle with the doorknobs as if they were locking them. But everyone in the house at this time was asleep. Another strange happening was that I heard laughing that didn't belong to anyone in the house. I asked my mum if she had one of her friends over from work, and she just replied, yes, but they've left now. I left it at that. In hindsight, there's no possible way anyone could have gotten out of the house in the time it took for me to hear the laugh and approach my mum. Lastly, there was a very strange event that happened to my sister that she swears by. It was outside, sunny, about 10, and she thinks to herself, Mum and Dad are going to be late to work. So she goes to wake them up, only to find a disgruntled couple saying it's the middle of the night. She goes to the window again, only to find that the day has ended and it's already night. I've heard this time loss ordeal could potentially be attributed to aliens. My uncle bought a new house a few years ago, and apparently there was an old woman who had trouble letting go. My aunt found said lady just lounging on the couch. She freaks out and demands that she leaves her house because it's theirs now. And as far as I'm aware, she did, and the spectre moved on. I'm currently reading through all of my old diaries from ages 11 to 22. I came across a night in question in the middle of an entry. When I was 12, my mum couldn't find a sitter for a late-night meeting, so I had to go along with her, with my younger brother and a friend, Mac. We had to keep to ourselves. It was in a church at night. Naturally, a cemetery in the back was where we decided to play. My entry goes that we were in the cemetery in the dark. I screamed and hid behind a gravestone to scare them. My brother taught us a ritual to bring out spirits. You stand on a gravestone, say, "May rise" 10 times, and I stood on about 6 different stones and did them. Then I was standing on one, and Mac and my brother were facing me. Mac saw something walk towards them and then run. I saw a black something that was hunched over going behind a tree. My brother saw it too. Then we were up near the church, and I was able to stare at one right next to the tree. I stared for a while. It was moving its head a lot, then it waved at me. Even Mac saw it too. Mac then said run. But I was left standing on the stone facing my brother, Mac, and the church, and a wooded area to the right. Mac said that he saw a tall robed person standing behind a stone after, at the back of the cemetery. While we were making out what they were seeing, it appeared to be a few rows closer. They screamed and pulled me off the grave. I fell on my stomach and looked up to see my brother running towards the church spotlight, and I followed. I was computing what I thought was a hunched, robed person walking behind a tree within the woods next to our church. At the same time, they were absorbed in the figure behind me. It was very odd. I also want to point out that I completely forgot about the part where we stood under the light and stared at one next to the tree. All 3 of us stood there in silence for at least a few minutes, and I remember watching its head rotate around the shoulders like a pinwheel so fast it became blurry. I want to tell you about the creepiest thing that ever happened to me. It's actually a series of a few incidents that have happened over the course of several years. When I was young, I had awoken abruptly in the middle of the night. I'd heard my dad call me from downstairs. It was really dark, and I was wondering what he had wanted. I hopped out of bed and flew down the stairs as fast as my little feet would carry me. I had reached the landing and looked out into the darkness and whispered, "Yeah, Dad?" There was no response from behind the darkness. I listened. Then a familiar sound penetrated the blackness of the room. It was my dad's earth-shattering snores. My mum must have kicked him out of the bed for being loud. Confused, I looked towards the kitchen, and for some reason felt compelled to go there. I headed down the hallway into the kitchen to find a small fire starting in the oven. I ran into the living room and shook my dad awake. He put out the fire and took me back to bed. This was the first incident. The second happened several years later. I was on the computer playing RuneScape and chatting with a few friends when I heard my dad call me from upstairs. "Be there in a minute," I called out loud. I headed upstairs into our living room, only to find no one there. Bewildered, I headed over to the stairs figuring he was still in his bedroom. I called up the stairs but got no reply. I started to take a few steps until a familiar rumble was heard in the distance. He was asleep. He didn't call me. I was a little freaked out at this point and had remembered what happened years later. I stood in silence for a few moments until I heard a knock at the door. I froze. It was 11:30 p.m. Why would anyone be knocking on doors this late? I might have answered it too, if it were not for what had just creeped me out. I went over to the window and looked out and saw two larger middle-aged men. I went back to my computer to tell my creepy tale to my RuneScape friends. A few days later, I had discovered that several houses in my neighborhood had been robbed and people had been hurt. Turns out they received a knock on the door late at night, only to have the men push their way into the house and rob them. This was incident number 2. Another few years later, I was heading home from a friend's house late at night. It was getting very dark, and it was a bit foggy as it was fall. There are 2 ways to walk home from my friend's house, one significantly longer than the other. Normally, I would take the longer way when it was dark, as I felt it safer. But I was really tired and wanted to get home, so I figured why not? Let's take the shortcut. I began walking down the shortcut, which was basically a path that cut through the long way. It was very foggy, and you could only see so far, when all of a sudden, almost as if within the soundtrack itself, I heard someone, a male's voice, shout my name so loud, I threw down my headphones and they hit the ground. I nervously took a long look around for a moment, but no one was there. I swore I'd heard it though. Male voices, screaming my name. It sounded so distressed. I looked down the path now, too afraid to continue down it. A lone figure appeared through the fog, almost exactly like this was out of some sort of horror movie. You best believe I turned tail and ran until I got home. This was incident number 3. The final incident happened only a few years ago. I made a friend who enjoyed all things paranormal, and she was always researching and looking into situations that involved anything of the like. She had convinced me to let her try to do some sort of contact with the spirit world to see if I had anything following me. As I had mentioned, I had thought it in the past. I had experienced some paranormal activities, but I had never mentioned to her these stories. She took the pendant I wore around my neck and used it as a pendulum and swung over words and letters, and apparently it was supposed to spell out things or say words like a big Ouija board. She began asking a few general questions. I wasn't really paying attention, although it did interest me a little. I didn't truly believe it at all. Until she spelled out 3 words: fire, door, and path. I freaked out a little, and I think my friend knew by the look on my face. I then went to tell her exactly what I had experienced with the male who sounded like my dad calling my name. We both got very freaked out and decided it would be best to leave the rest of our questions unanswered. Since that day, I haven't experienced anything else that I can recall, but I still do think back to those times and try to figure them out, but still have been unable to. When I was around 5 to 6, my parents got a pair of twin-size mattresses second-hand from a family that didn't want to take them with them when they moved away. I got one and my younger brother got one. We were excited to have them since they were our first big kid beds compared to our previous beds. That first night I remember waking up because something shook my bed, like I heard it squeak and shake. I awoke and screamed for my mum. She told me it was just a dream and to go back to sleep. This happened again the next few nights. Then my mum and dad got fed up with it and told me to stop waking them up. My mum prayed over my bed for it to stop moving, and that night I slept fine and my mattress didn't move again for several more nights. Then one night I awoke to what felt like something moving inside the mattress under me, like a finger running up and down my spine. I remember telling my mum it felt like a rat or cockroach crawling up and down my back. She must have thought I was crazy, because she ignored my complaints that it kept waking me up.
It was around this time I began to see figures in the hall, and instead of waking them, I just snuck into their bed. This was a pattern that continued until I was too big to sneak into their bed, and dealt with some insomnia and sleep paralysis for several years. 7 years later, my parents finally bought me a new mattress, and I remembered the first night sleeping on it was like heaven. It didn't move or anything. I told my mum that I was so happy because the mattress didn't move, and she was shocked because she thought I had just grown out of it.
Let me take you back 10 years or so. It's 2 in the morning, not a breath of sound, and I sit at the dinner table under a single light bulb eating frosted flakes. I'm the only soul in the entire house. The family is gone, and the doors are all locked. I feel tired, but the cereal is delicious. When suddenly the light bulb flickers. Weird. That doesn't usually happen. Okay, back on, no problem. At least I can finish. That's when, not 4 feet away, the back door opens. Several things happened at that precise moment, and if you were able to capture it in slow motion, it would have looked like this. Milk and cereal splashing and scattering across the table. A spoon clinks on the floor. I have discovered the secret to human flight, and my body floats effortlessly 4 feet off the ground. My chair tumbles backward beneath me, but I give no heed. My mouth is open in horror, unable to make a noise. My eyes are locked on the door. The door! It swings open to the fullest amount, but all I see is this blackness outside. When my feet touch the ground, I sprint several feet backwards and catch my breath. The door frame is still empty. Nothing appears to have moved. I don't feel any wind and I can't hear anything. What the hell? After I gather my courage, I investigate. The door handle is locked, but it must not have clicked completely when it was shut. I figure the house must have had some pressure change somewhere. And, I don't know, suction did it. Yeah, that must be it. And the light bulb? It died, I think, a few days after. So, here's me hoping it was just random chance. I hope. We got into a car accident. The car flipped, and I got shot out of a window because I didn't wear my seatbelt. 1 second I'm in the car, the next I'm staring up at the night sky. I try and get up, but it hurts so badly that I just lay down and sleep. It's just a weird dream, I think to myself. Then an unknown amount of time later, I'm suddenly lifted up by sturdy hands and pushed. They push me towards something, so I start walking. I'll never forget how sturdy those hands were, like the definition of sturdy. The next thing I know, I'm at the crash site asking if this is a dream. According to my family, they were convinced I was under the car because they couldn't find me. Then suddenly, wandered up, incoherently babbling all over, asking if it was a dream. I never knew whose hands they were, or if they were even hands, to be honest. It's just such a vivid part of my murky memory. I basically broke through the window with my head. So who knows? It was around 10:30 p.m. Zay, my son, would not go to sleep as he was restless and fighting his usual sleep schedule. Kids, what are you gonna do? When his mum was in the kitchen making dinner when he decided to spontaneously awake, I decided to focus on getting him back to sleep. I picked him up out of his crib and thought I saw a human-shaped shadow in the corner of my room. But because I was moving so fast to get him and to make a bottle, I didn't notice too much. After trying to sit down on the couch and feed him his bottle on it, I realized that it wasn't going to work. So I let my wife know that I was going to go to his bedroom to try and feed him and get him to sleep. So I went in, sat down in my rocking chair and tried to feed him with the door to the kitchen open. After realizing that it wasn't going to work with the door open, I stood up, walked over to the door and shut it. The room became pitch black. Now I'm not afraid of the dark, I should make this clear. So I shut the door and sat back down in the rocking chair and started to rock back and forth, hoping to get Zay to sleep. He kept on moving from side to side trying to get comfortable, and he was. I looked up to try and give him a bit more space and for his head to lay on my chest. As I picked my head up, I looked towards the corner of the room when I saw a human-like figure from the floor standing ominously in the corner. At that moment, I didn't feel scared, more protective than anything. I wanted to ask why it was there, but out of respect and tiredness, and not wanting to wake up my son, I just stared at it, and it stared back at me. At least 15 minutes went by just rocking in the chair, staring at this entity, and it never moved once. Enter my cat Missy. It pushed open the door, and as soon as the light hit it, I watched it evaporate into nothingness. It was gone, and the cat pushing the door woke Zane up. So I shooed her out, closed the door, all the while holding him. I sat back down, looked at the corner, as my son put his head onto my chest and went back to sleep. The thing then formed again, out of the floor, and we continued the stare-off for another 5 minutes, until my cat opened the door again, and once again, it vanished. This time I decided to leave the room with Zay in my arms and his bottle in my right hand. That was the last time I saw it, but I think it still lingers around. Both my wife and I feel it in his room every time we go in there day or night, whoever or whatever it is. At least it doesn't seem malicious. I had 2 uncles who weren't related to each other. They'd each married one of my dad's sisters. They were good friends though, because their wives were close, so they would take joint vacations and co-host parties and things. One of them died and his widow bought him a plot in a certain cemetery. 2 years later, the other one died, and his widow ended up buying the plot in the same cemetery, figuring she could bury her husband next to her brother-in-law. That way they wouldn't be alone. So I'm at funeral number 2, standing in a cemetery on a snowy day, about to bury my second uncle in as many years. Suddenly, I hear a sizzle. I blink, and instead of a cemetery, I'm staring at the backyard of my second uncle's beach house. My first uncle is at the barbecue grill, and he turns to me and says, "Do you want any lamb?" Then my second uncle walks up with paper plates ready to serve. I blink and I'm back in the cemetery. I don't think that ghosts roam the earth, but I'm pretty sure I had a vision of where they both went, together on a vacation, waiting for more family to arrive. I'm not sure if my mother's house is haunted. Nothing strange ever happened there except for one time. I was woken up in the middle of the night by what I thought was my little sister. No one had said anything or touched me in any way to wake me up, but there's that distinct feeling you get when you know there's someone there staring at you. You can feel their presence. Well, that is what woke me up. The presence of a little girl. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel someone there, and it felt like it could be my little sister. But whoever was there was angry. The malevolent presence of a young girl. I asked quietly, "Maddie, what are you doing here?" I got no response, but felt that angry presence. I told myself I was imagining things, but I was paralyzed with fear by this point. It was very, very angry, and it felt pretty hefty. After a few minutes, I convinced myself that it had to be my younger sister, who was absolutely furious with me or perhaps sleepwalking, and I was working myself into a fit for no reason. Then, suddenly, I was struck in the crotch. Not too hard. I turned on the light, only to find no one was standing there, and the door was shut quite tightly. Utterly confused, I went to check on my mother and my sister. They were both sound asleep. I did not go back to sleep that night. That's the only strange thing that ever happened. I don't know if it was a ghost. It could have easily been my mind playing tricks on me, even making me believe I got punched, I suppose. But it always felt like a paranormal entity to me. I have an identical twin sister, and have experienced some strange stuff. Once, when she was flying from New Zealand to California, about an hour into the flight, she experienced the worst turbulence of her life. Food was flying everywhere. Passengers were scared, and the pilot even came on to say that he'd never encountered anything like it in his 20 years of flying. Now, as you can imagine, my sister was pretty freaked out and scared, especially since she had a long way to go before the flight was over. But fortunately, it only lasted about 10 minutes. I was on the East Coast at the time, and woke up in the middle of the night, out of a dead sleep, feeling terribly frightened. I was so anxious that I just sat in my bed, and just knew that something was wrong with my sister. I remember looking at the clock, and wondering what would wake me. It was about 3 a.m. I felt hopeless, and interestingly enough, kind of nauseous. After 10 minutes, the feeling faded. I felt that my sis was fine, and resumed sleep. Hours later, once her flight had landed, she called me to let me know that she was back in the States. I asked her how the flight was, and asked if she had any turbulence. And she was like, yes, it was terrible. Food was flying, the attendants had to buckle up, everyone was just waiting to fall out the sky. I asked her what time it happened, and after doing the math with time zones, it was when I woke up to that feeling of being scared and sick. She told me that the plane was hitting bad turbulence. They tried going down in altitude, which made her stomach queasy. Lots of stuff like that happened with us, but that was the first time something woke me up in the middle of the night. Twin connections are strange. I've had several paranormal experiences through my childhood and adulthood that were and still are unexplainable. I never thought my childhood home itself was bad. My parents bought the house and moved in to the acreage when I was 1 to 2 years old. The original owners built the house, but we were the first to live in it, if that makes sense. I always thought the land was bad. We lived less than 1/4 of a mile from my dad's pasture, and the pasture had wagon trails through it. Though I don't have proof, we always thought they were Oregon Trail imprints. The energy was off, but it was beautiful and the scenery drew you in. As I said before, I had more than one experience at that particular house. The first story that comes to mind is when I was a teenager between the ages of 13 and 14. I was home alone. The house was a single story with an unfinished basement. The basement had 2 bedrooms with carpet and drywall. The remainder of the basement was cement flooring and cement blocks with exposed beams and wires. We had a common area with a TV, foosball table, and computer desk, but the majority of the basement was used for storage. I was home alone, for one of the first times. I almost always had an older sister home, so I wasn't usually alone, but this time I really was. My mum and dad were gone for the day, about an hour and a half away, and my 16 to 17-year-old sister had gone to see her boyfriend. I was enjoying my time alone. I was blaring my rock music as loud as it could go, trying to sing along and hit the high notes in Atreyu's lead, sails, and paper anchors. I'm nailing it, and not really paying attention to anything that's going on around me, when all of a sudden I hear my sister's voice say, "Hey," the way she always did. I turned down my music and yelled up the stairs, "What?" expecting her to come down and tell me what she needed me for. But she never came. Confused, I walked upstairs and looked around, calling her, and I froze when I saw that the front door remained locked, and her car wasn't in the driveway. The second story I'll share tonight is from the summer of 2009. I was 14. I remember the time of year because my aunt passed away from lung cancer that July. She had breast cancer that was in remission for 10 years. When we noticed it the second time, it was already in her brain. My aunt was childless, but treated all of us like we were her own. She was a hugely positive part of my childhood. She was my safe place. I've never handled death in the way that you might. I find relief in death and cry out of happiness for the person so they are no longer in pain, and for their loved ones left behind. I didn't cry for myself. I had to tell myself to cry when I simply felt relief so that I wouldn't stand against my weeping sisters. No matter how I felt, I was missing a very important woman in my life now. I would go through phases of moving my furniture around the room to unusual places. At one point my bed was centered in the room. I don't have a headboard, and on the wall opposite of the bedroom door was a closet. I centered my vanity. This vanity was vintage and heavy. The mirror was textured from age around the edges and would reflect the majority of the room. I went to bed on my bed, in the center of the room, and woke up that next morning just as the sun was beginning to rise. My window faced the west, but the sun hadn't filled the room just yet, only about halfway. I woke up, with my back to the closet, and bedroom door on my face towards the mirror. I rubbed my eyes and stretched before looking in the mirror. In the reflection stood my auntie in a white robe. Her hair looked beautiful. She wore wigs and bandanas towards the end of her life, a chocolate brown color cut in a long bob. She was bright and beautiful, and I was immediately very terrified. It was my aunt, but I knew she was gone. I covered my face and body with my quilt and waited. I felt pressure on my mattress and felt someone get on the bed along with me. I felt knees on each side of me straddling me. I was petrified and didn't trust that it was really her. She never said anything to me, but I felt her there for the moment, and I fell asleep hiding under the covers and woke up again later that morning. I believe it was my aunt, visiting me to let me know that she was okay, and I felt terrible that she scared me. I haven't seen her since, but I'm fully aware of her presence at times. She and Grandma have always loved that I keep cats. I went hunting with my cousin once, up on a mountain where we live. We were bow hunting, and he tells me to go over the hill and sit. I go and sit between some downed trees, sit there about 20 to 30 minutes, and I close my eyes and listen a little better. I hear a growl about a foot away from my face. Sounds big too. I open my eyes and nothing, nowhere. So I sit for a few more minutes and close my eyes again. I had my bow sitting across my leg, and something jerks the bow, like a couple of inches. Definitely not to get my attention. I was like, screw this and get up. As I'm going back up the hill, I look, and there are old clothes everywhere. I don't know if someone had died up there or what, but it's the mountains east of Kentucky. Stuff happens, and there's room to dump bodies without people knowing. This next story happened to my kid. We lived in public housing at the time. Later found out they had moved a cemetery to build the apartments. First time when he was around 4, he came running from the hallway between the kitchen and living room and hides behind the recliner I'm in. You could look straight into the kitchen dining room from where I was. He peeks around and says there's a man staring at me. I think, what? And go look out the door and window, but there's nothing. I tell him there's no one out there. He's still hiding and he says, he's still there. I tell him there isn't. I get goosebumps and ask what he's doing. Just look at me, I say. That's when it all started. He told us there was a woman who lived in his closet, who had scraggly hair and was mean. He never slept in there. He would just randomly say, "Do you see the girl? She's wearing a flower dress." He spoke of multiple ghosts the time we lived there. But another time I was going to our bedroom on the 2nd floor. My wife worked 3rd shift and was asleep. I go up and get her before work, and when I got to the top of the steps, she sits and says, "Who's that woman?" I tell her our son is behind me and that's it. "No, there's a woman behind you."
and I thought she was riding on your back, she was so close. There's a whole load more encounters that I can't remember off the top of my head, but as you can imagine, living on top of an ex-graveyard is creepy.
I was at my grandma's house in Mexico. There's a demon my mum calls La Anima, which translates to a soul. The thing has been haunting my mum's family since they were small kids, and they said the house was built on an old graveyard from the early 1900s. As a kid, lots of things happened that traumatized me. But the one thing that has stuck with me is a nightmare I had about her. I dreamt I was walking in my grandma's house and no one was home. Even though I knew no one was home, I felt as though someone was watching me. As I get to the backyard, I see La Anima, who's dressed in all black, but as I approach her, I can see her face. She has yellow eyes that sink into blackness, a thin, narrow, pale nose, and her mouth was something else. Her teeth were razor sharp and her gums were bleeding. As she came closer, I knelt down and started praying with a rosary in hand. She starts to cackle, and it gets louder and louder, and at this point in my dream, I know I'm dreaming and I try to focus on praying, but I can't. She finally reaches me, kneels down in front of me, and continues to laugh. I stop praying. I look up at her, and she straight up says, "That's not going to help you," and continued laughing. I looked down at the rosary. It was gone. So was she. Fast forward to a few years later. My uncle and I were talking about La Anima, and he started talking about a nightmare he had. As he's talking, I realized we both had the same nightmare. It's crazy, but I never told anyone about that dream. I served in the Oregon Eugene mission in the US from October 2015 to October 2017. My first area was on the coast in Bandon, a town where some Native Americans massacred some settlers, not to mention the town burning down. My mission companion, Jake, and I lived in a home that the church rented for us that was right next to the docks. In our study room, we had a sliding glass door that led to the backyard. On that same outside wall was the window that led to the garage. In the garage below that window was our washer and dryer. If you were in either the study with the sliding door or in the garage alone at night, you would hear someone knock 2 or 3 times quite fast. But when you would go to check, no one would be there. Many times one of us would be reading my scriptures and planning some lesson details, while the other was in the bathroom or kitchen. The tapping would happen, and the person who wasn't in the room would come in and ask if it was what we dubbed the glass tapper. When I got my new companion, Mike, about 6 weeks into my mission, I started hearing some weird things in the abandoned house, other than the glass tapper. We would come home to hear someone running around our apartment and oftentimes see our fridge shake for no reason, as if one peg were too short. One day, I had it and looked at the fridge and yelled, "Stop it!" which actually seemed to work. My original companion Jake in this same house in Bandon and I were laying down in my bed at night. My missionary companion was in his bed on the opposite wall of the room. My back was to him, and we were just talking about what we did before our mission, girls and whatnot. My companion got up to use the bathroom, and once he shut the door I heard someone crawl into his bed, as if they pulled the cover over themselves. I knew it wasn't him because I could hear him peeing. I didn't turn over to look and see, because I was shocked. And yes, I told him after he crawled into bed again, because I didn't know how to bring it up.
About 6 months into my mission, I was in Roseburg, Oregon. I started to have dreams. I wouldn't exactly call them nightmares like of demons, like the supernatural ones with black eyes, but they had smiles like the cartoon Grinch that were really long and curly. They would tell me I was no good and going to hell, and would put my arm to the square and cast them away. But they never laughed. They usually just shut up and stared at me. I started to wear my mission tag that's commonly associated with Mormon missionaries to bed, and that completely solved the dream problem. But sometimes I would just be laying there and feel the end of my bed shake. Not violently, but enough to wake me up and just to let me know they were still there. It still happens sometimes. No nightmares, but the shaking still happens. I don't know how to tell that part to my wife. In Roseburg, Oregon, my companions and I were teaching a family once. They eventually told us that their baby girls, who were 2 on 1, would wake up in the night and point to a particular corner of the room as they screamed. They also had an old railroad lantern that got so hot the glass shattered. They asked us to perform an exorcism on the home. We told them that we would bless the house, and they asked me to act as a voice for it. As I was praying, I felt as if there was someone standing so close to me that the face was only an inch away. You know the feeling, when someone is getting close to your face when your eyes are closed. How can you sense it? It was like that, but hot, like an oven. These are my experiences. I worked in a cafe that was retrofitted into a very old building downtown. One day I was in the walk-in fridge in the horrible, unfinished basement. I had the door open and was gathering up whatever I needed when I saw out of the corner of my eye a white shape move past the door. My immediate reaction was, "Oh, that's just Chris the waiter in his white shirt, no big deal." It was only several hours later that I realized, 1, Chris had never come downstairs, as I asked. 2, Chris was wearing a blue shirt that day, and since we had been working together for half the shift, I knew that. 3, if he had walked past that door in that direction, he'd have walked straight into a wall. What strikes me about this situation is that it was a totally illogical conclusion to arrive at, and I should have been freaked out by the anomalies, but instead calmly leapt to a faulty explanation. I think the whatever it was messed with my head, radiating "I'm something harmless and familiar" vibes. I had a friend who died of AIDS in the 90s, before we had so much knowledge about the disease, or the excellent pharmaceuticals of today. He was such a wonderful man, joyful, loving, and as he got sicker, his friends and I set up a roster of folks to bring food and visit him. He died in a period where I hadn't seen him for 2 weeks, and I felt terribly guilty. Besides grieving him, I was so sad I hadn't said goodbye. Guilty I hadn't signed up for a roster spot in those last 2 weeks, and ashamed that one of the reasons I hadn't signed up was my horror at what the disease had done to him. About a week later, I woke up with a feeling of joy and forgiveness with a touch of goodbye. I'm sure it was Brent. I'm not an especially joyful person, and I don't generally give up on guilt. It would just be like Brent, to go on nurturing his friends even after death. That's what I have, and what I can't explain after 60 years of skepticism. About 15 years ago, in the small town of Darlington, Indiana, my mother had a couple of paranormal experiences. I was around 3 or 4 at the time, so I can't speak of my experience. My mother has only had paranormal experiences ever when she lived here. When we first moved, there was a dog that we had called Diamond. She went outside to tie the dog to the only tree in our yard when she met our neighbor, who she described as a crazy old lady.
The old lady told her that if she were to tie her dog to the tree, it would go mad. It happened to the last two neighbors, and my mum just dismissed her as crazy. My mum would see our dog at night playing around and barking. She said that ghost dogs would come from our forest behind our house and play with him. Slowly over time, our dog became more and more aggressive. He'd attack anyone who would come in range except me. He'd let me play with him though, and I could go by him and pet him. And I'd even put rocks in his mouth and he wouldn't care. But after a while he became so aggressive we couldn't even get close to feeding him, so my mum had to put him down. A few days later, my mum said she experienced the scariest thing of her life. She said that one night she was in bed without my dad, since he was at the hospital during cancer treatments. I was in my bedroom sleeping at the time, and she said that she woke up to the sound of a water sprinkler outside our trailer. She saw our cat staring at the end of the bed at the window where the sound was coming from. She got up and looked outside to see flames being spat from just the air. She looked for a minute as it slowly approached the trailer, and she ran back to bed and hid under the covers and prayed that it would go away. The next morning there were no signs of any burn marks, and the entity never returned. We finally moved from the trailer about 3 years later when my dad passed away in the trailer of melanoma. What's your guys' idea on what this could have been?
I've never experienced anything paranormal myself, but my family has plenty of stories to share. This one took place sometime during the mid-1950s. My grandma came from a very poor family in Mexico. Her house was more like a shack, with a dirt floor. Every morning my great-grandmother would send her two eldest daughters, my grandma is the third-born, to go to the woods to collect water from the river to bring back so the family could use it for washing, drinking, or cooking. The second sister didn't tag along this particular morning, so it was up to the eldest sister to do the honor. The walk to the river was about 2 miles or so. She gets there and sees a long, black-haired girl playing with a stick, tapping it against the flowing water. The girl had her back to my grandma's sister. She didn't see too many people come to the area, so she tried striking up a conversation with the girl. The girl didn't answer her, or even turn her back to acknowledge her. My grandma's sister shrugs it off and approaches the river to collect the water. When she got closer, the girl turns away slowly to face my grandma's sister. And my grandma's sister immediately sees that the girl has no face, just skin replacing the eyes, the nose and lips. She didn't really have a chin either, it was sort of just rounded off. Immediately my grandma's sister dropped the bucket and fled the scene, running the whole 2 miles, and she refused to ever do that chore again.
When I was 6 years old, we lived in the center of the set of 3 very similar houses. I remember ours was purple, the one to the left was blue, and the one to the right was yellow. I recently had bought one of those big inflatable bouncy balls from Walmart and had no one to play with me, so I played with it in the backyard by myself. After school one day, I accidentally hit the purple ball to the yellow house side of the fence. I was going to ask my mom what to do, but a kid on the other side hit it back over to me. Thinking we could play, I hit it back over and he returned it. It became a daily thing, and I would just hit the ball back and forth with him until I got bored after school. The kid wouldn't respond to any questions I had, so I assumed he was just shy. At one point I hit it over and he didn't return it, so I asked my mum if I could climb the fence and go get it. She was never outside with me, so she always thought I was playing alone, I guess. We only got the house because my mum was friends with the landlord, and the houses were recently built. She told me that no one had ever lived there and that they were trying to sell it. We moved not long after, but I still have no idea who was returning that ball to me. I've heard ghost stories my whole life from my mum and other family members, but never seen anything myself. That's until my family moved into our house in 2007. Right from the beginning, the house was dark, gloomy, and cold. We moved into the house in July, and I needed a sweater to feel comfortable. We live in Michigan, and July is one of our hottest months. It all started with seeing things from the corner of my eye, but not really seeing what it was, just knowing that it wasn't normal and that nothing should be there. Soon things would not be where I put them, looking on my desk at least 3 to 4 times, and finally finding it 10 minutes later sitting right in the middle of my desk in the open. Little things here and there, but always the feeling of being watched. I could never just walk into a room like a normal person would. I would stop at the doorway and peep inside to make sure that nothing was there, and I found myself tiptoeing and peering more and more. Then I started seeing a black mist. It would almost always come from down the hall from the back of the house. There's 1 bedroom and bathroom down that hall, and go into the kitchen. Our basement door is located in the kitchen, and also straight across from our side entrance door. I was walking through the kitchen to yell something down the basement to my husband, when all of a sudden something came rushing up to me. I fell to my knees, covered my head, and screamed. I could feel it go right over me so fast. One night my husband and I were watching TV, and here comes the mist down the hall and go into the kitchen. I screamed to my husband, "You saw that! You have to have seen it!" He admitted he had seen it before, and also said sometimes he would hear me yell for him, and when he would come to see what I needed, that I would be asleep on the couch or not even home yet. But he insisted that it was definitely my voice. Just a few months ago, my husband and oldest son were in the kitchen talking. My husband leaned against the sink, and my son leaned against the counter. My husband says that he saw a black shadow looking at them from the doorway to the dining room. He looks over to see if our son sees it, and he's just standing there with his mouth open looking right at it. My son says that he was looking at it, and when the shadow realized what they saw, that it backed up from the doorway really fast and vanished. My little guy, he's an 8-year-old, and was a premature baby at 26 weeks, only weighing 2 pounds at birth. He's smaller than an average 8-year-old and more babyish. He has high blood pressure, and when he gets upset, he passes out. So, we keep these things from him. One night he comes to me and says that I'm going crazy, and I ask him why. He says he thinks he just saw a black thing sitting at the dining room table. When he was younger, he would come running to me crying, saying he saw something. I tried to catch it on video, so I set my phone in the kitchen, and I didn't get it on camera, but I did get a voice recording of it talking. So creepy.
In the first year we moved to our new house, our nanny said that someone was copying my older sister. She said that she saw my older sister sitting by her bed, but that my sister was still in school, so it was a bit kind of creepy. Here's my experience though. I saw my younger sister walk into our parents' room, and I assumed that she was going in there to use their bathroom, and me being the funny one in the family decided that I would scare her. So I walked stealthily and got inside the bathroom, then screamed so that she would be frightened. But no one was there. The second time that I saw my younger sister's doppelganger was when I was on my phone minding my own business, when all of a sudden in the corner of my eye, I saw the head of my younger sister pop out behind my bedroom door to see what I was doing. Of course, I ignored her, thinking that she was just being silly, but she did it again. Her head popped out behind the door, and I got annoyed, so I chased after her and thought that she went to my parents' room, but of course, no one was there. She had been downstairs the whole time, and I would have heard her go down the stairs.
My grandfather was a labourer, and my grandmother was a housewife, so at the time they tended to travel from place to place until the work was done, and they would move on to the next place.
My grandfather was from the Natchez, Mississippi area. They moved into a house that had a fireplace, and the one thing she remembered about this house was that there was a dark spot on the floor, and no matter how hard they scrubbed it, it would never come up. When it rained, it became extremely slippery, and the water that came off it would look like blood. There was always a stench during this time, and nothing would curtail it. Nothing would stop it when the rain came. The stench was so oppressive. So one day my grandmother and grandfather asked the man who owned the house what happened. At first he was quiet, but then he told them that the wife of the previous tenant had hung herself one day when her husband was at work in the fields, and he came home to find her swinging from the rafters, and that she had bled out on that very spot. Well, my grandfather was your typical male, who really didn't give in to all the spooky and scary ghost stories. But my grandmother wouldn't drop the subject that she wanted to move, and she was going to move with or without him anyway. The argument broke off, and the next day he went to work out in the fields. A few hours later he left, and the sky got really dark, and there was a thunderstorm on my way, and my grandmother had my father, my uncle, and my aunt, all over them a few years apart, and she went about her daily routine. The rain came in for some reason, and she had to step outside the room. I believe it was the living room, and she left the children in there. She came back and saw this woman that had somehow gotten into the house. She didn't hear a knock on the door, as it was either locked or latched. She would have known if someone had come in. So she called her children over to her because she was scared at the time. The woman was wearing a dingy gown and also had stringy hair and pale skin. Her eyes were coming out of her head as she started walking towards her. So my grandmother, along with 3 small children, ran into the back bedroom, and the woman followed. About this time, my grandmother is fully convinced that this woman is an apparition, and she is afraid for herself, but for her children. About this time, my grandmother is fully convinced that this woman is an apparition, and she is afraid for herself, but for her children as well. The woman comes into the room and stands at the door, and the look on her face is like she was staring through it. Every time my grandmother asks what's wrong, what do you want, and what can I do for you, yield no reply, because her family had always told her that if an apparition approached her, they were just trying to tell what happened and the reason they left, and trying to make peace. When my grandmother got through speaking, the woman looked up at her, and my grandmother saw the rope burns on her neck, and she let out a very eerie deep moan. My grandmother said that while this was occurring, she kept smelling damp earth and leaves. She also said that before this happened, that spot on the floor, for lack of a better term, was more wet and slippery than usual. This comes from my stepmother, who heard it from her grandmother, and this happened in a place called So-So, Mississippi. This was at a time right before the Great Depression, or maybe the late 1800s, somewhere in that time, but exactly which year I can't say. One day when everyone was out in the field, a stranger started walking up the road towards the house. There's nothing really odd about him, he just doesn't have a whole lot to say. So of course my grandmother's father goes out to meet him and starts a conversation with him and talks a little bit, and decides that he seems reasonably okay, so they invite him inside for a meal. They chat with him for a bit, and they offer him a place to stay for the night as he's passing through. He doesn't act nervous, he is extremely calm. Anyway, towards the evening for some odd reason the man dies, so my grandmother's father sends his son to get the country coroner so that he can get the body of the man that's in the living room so that they can have him laid out on a table and do the formal proceedings. The man and his sons go and get the coroner, and they lock the door and they tell everyone they'll be back, when they can just keep the door locked until they arrive. It's about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, so they know it's going to take a few hours because they have to go by foot, as there are no horses nor carts to take. At 8 o'clock the doors are locked, the lights are on, and people are just sitting around this time, for lack of a better term, and a thing walks into the room It's short, stocky, has spikes and a tail and floppy pointed ears, muscular, and maybe the tallest point is 4 feet. It doesn't say a word and people don't know how it got in. No one heard the door slam. No one heard the door close. They just know that whatever it was you want to call it had eyes, and they are cherry red and fangs protruding from its mouth. It walked up to the table towards the dead man. It doesn't speak, it doesn't look at anyone. It doesn't make a sound but simply picks up the man like a rag doll, puts the man on his shoulders and walks through the door and disappears.
A little backstory. I was around 11 years old when my grandmother passed away. My parents both worked early in the morning, and she was the one who usually put my brother and I on the bus. We lived in the country, and so the bus came to our houses. I don't know why my brother wasn't home with me this particular morning, but I was getting on the bus myself. Anyway, I had gotten up and dressed and everything by myself with no problems and nothing weird. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse that was over a century old, and creaking sounds in the house were nothing out of the ordinary. But when I went downstairs, it felt different. I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps walking up and down the hallway stairs. I was trying to watch for the bus and figure out who else was home, when suddenly the footsteps started at the far end of the house and ran down the hall all the way to the stairwell, where a male voice called my name. It was familiar, but not anyone in my family. So I went to the foot of the stairs and walked about halfway up and turned to look at the top of the stairs, afraid of what I would see. And there was no one there, but the sound of footsteps running back up the hall, and the feeling that someone had just been standing there was enough for me to run outside and wait for the bus out there. I have plenty of other stories growing up in a mildly haunted house, but this was the only time that it ever spoke to me. The grandmother I referenced previously got a kitten when I was young, probably 5 or so. She was white with bright blue eyes and a black spot at the base of her tail. They called her Princess, and I loved her. After both my grandparents had passed away, as my grandpa passed less than 2 years after my grandma, we took care of her. We didn't move her out of their house because we were going to move in, and we were working on going through what was left in the house beforehand. It didn't make sense to move her if we were still going to be there every day. Fast forward to moving day, the night before my first day of school in 7th grade. My parents, brother and I all grabbed our pillows and blankets and went down the road to our new house to officially move in. I was the first one through the door, and was uncomfortably greeted by the sight of Princess laying dead on the floor. It appeared that she had a heart attack mid-stride, and she landed perfectly on a small decorative pillow that, according to my mum, hadn't been there when she had been in the house earlier that afternoon. I was traumatized. I hadn't fully grieved for my grandparents, and now their cat, who I saw as a physical connection to them, was gone too. It was rough. Fast forward several years and I'm 16 now. My family didn't get another cat. My dad didn't like them, and we had 4 dogs at the time. I'm laying in bed one night trying to fall asleep, and I feel the daintiest footsteps on my bed. You must understand that I've slept with my bedroom door closed for my entire life, and the footsteps were too light to be any of our dogs, but they started by my feet and walked up next to my legs, and finally I felt what seemed to be a cat curled up and laying down right at my stomach. I didn't want to move because I didn't know what was going on, but after a while the weight seemed to just lift away. I didn't feel movement, it just got lighter, and when I looked down nothing was there. But I know that it was Princess coming to cuddle for a little while. That is the one and only time I've experienced anything like that, and I've never heard of anyone else having a similar experience.
I'm 30 years old now, but want to share with you a true story that my dad told me when I was around 10, and has stuck with me till this day. I am originally from Romania, I want you to know where I'm from because a lot of you probably haven't have heard of it, or if you do, know it from Dracula. One thing you need to know in order to understand the impact that the story had on me was that we are a country where the majority have a strong belief in God and evil, angels and demons. My dad is, well, something similar to a Catholic. He sings in church. He's not a priest. Back home we have a priest and a singer. That's called a dascal, and they do every church together, like the Sunday prayeries, the baptisms, the wedding and stuff. Anyway, one summer night they went to do the ceremony for someone who'd passed away. They were all there singing, when all of a sudden it started to get really cold inside the room. They could even see their breath forming in front of them, despite the fact it was the middle of summer. My father and the priest looked at each other, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't want to say anything to the family, because they didn't want to scare them, so they continued. A few minutes later, my dad started to lose his voice. He was opening his mouth, trying to sing, but the words didn't come out, and all of a sudden, they heard a big bang just over their heads in the attic, and the ceiling started to get red, and a fluid began dripping. That was something they couldn't ignore. They went to see what happened, and when they hit the attic, they saw a big glass barrel that was full with red wine had exploded out the blue. They went downstairs, finished the ceremony, and then went home. On his way home, my dad had to walk by the cemetery. He had done that for many years. It was a normal thing for him to do, not remotely frightening. But after what had happened that night, he felt something was wrong. It was about 11, and just him on the road after he passed the cemetery. And then suddenly he couldn't shake the feeling like something was following him. He was kind of shocked after what happened, and too scared to turn around. The feeling engulfed him. It was as if it were getting closer, feeling its breath on his neck, and his hair stood on end. All of his senses told him not to turn around, which he did, and he just went home in a straight line. When he got home, my mum was waiting for him on the porch. He entered the front garden, locked the gate behind him, and when he reached my mother, she asked him, "Who's the man behind you?" She said that there was a tall man behind him. The next morning, when they wake up, they found the front gates open. My dad always said to me that the devil always tries to scare you and get the ones with a strong belief in God. If they don't try and scare you, it's because they don't need to, because you've already turned away from him, according to my dad. My dad passed away when I was finishing undergrad. My baby brother was in junior year of high school, and I was the executor of his estate. He didn't have a will, and brother was obviously a minor, so it made things difficult. So one night I go to this old bookstore called Vaughn's that he loved to get a quote for his Stephen King collection. While they're going through everything, I walk around. There's a basement chock full of books, and I walk down there, and there's no one else around. It must have been about 8:30 or so, and when I enter, a book falls off the shelf. Immediately I feel a presence, but also this invisible sort of trail that I'm trying to follow. So I walk through the rows, thinking and just follow this trail until it leads to the sci-fi section. Here I get an overwhelming reassurance that my dad is in front of me. So I'm standing there and say to myself, okay, I'm open, receptive, let me hear. Forget the house. It blows me away. I've not even thought about the house of his that my brothers and I are trying to get baby bro through school in. So I have this little back and forth with myself about how I'm not going to quit and fight, yada yada. So I walk along and go to where the book fell, where I first entered the basement, and I pick it up. It's a book titled Teaching Your Children to Live Without You. That was it.
It sent chills down my spine. I go upstairs, grab his books, say thank you and leave. When I get home, I open the mailbox and there's a letter from the bank demanding the full outstanding mortgage in 30 days. The sheriff came after the 30 days had elapsed and kicked my 17-year-old brother out, called him a low-down piece of crap, and then they sold it and made $130K. And it took me 3 years of being my own lawyer to sue the city to claim the estate equity in the property. I had an apartment in grad school that was set up in a way that you walk into the living room from the main door, and there's a door to the dining room and kitchen, and then a hallway to the bedroom and bathroom in the back. Only the person sitting in the chair by that door from the living room to the kitchen could see into the rest of the apartment. So one afternoon I had a friend from work over, and she brought her friend Hannah with her. My friend and I were on the couch and Hannah was in the chair that could see into the rest of the apartment. We had a good visit with nothing remarkable to note. A few days later, I saw my friend at work. She had a weird look on her face, and she walked up and said, "Hannah said the weirdest thing when we left your apartment the other day. She said Sammy's roommate must be horrible." Apparently, she saw a young woman walk out the bedroom and into the kitchen, get a glass from the cupboard, fill it with water, then take a drink, rinse it, dry it, and put it away, while glaring at Hannah the entire time. Then she walked back into the bedroom. This is weird, because I lived alone. A few months later, my best friend and I were watching a movie in the living room, and I decided to go to bed a little earlier than her. When I left her, she was laying on the couch with my dog. About 5 minutes later, I heard my dog growling ferociously for a few minutes. It didn't seem out of the ordinary because my dog had a habit of growling at people that walked on the sidewalk in front of my house. Several more months go by, and I had since moved into a new home. The first time my best friend visited me, she said, "Thank God you're not in that apartment so I can tell you what I saw." That night, she stayed at my house and heard the dog barking. She experienced something. She went on to tell me that she was on the couch with the dog, and then out of nowhere she jumped off the chair and went to the opposite side of the living room and started growling in her direction. All of a sudden, she saw this guy in jeans and a white tee sitting on the floor with his back leaned up against the couch she was on. He was watching the TV, and then he turned around to look at her when she jumped, then turned back to watching the TV. She stared for a few seconds and then he vanished from the inside out, like how an old television shuts off. Then the dog jumped back onto the couch with her, and the night continued without incident. I never experienced anything weird or had any sort of strange feeling there, but I was pretty shut off to that sort of stuff at that point in my life anyway. One night I woke up to something settling over my face. Initially I thought it was my bed covers, but then I realized it all felt wrong and reached up and grabbed the cloth and threw it. I reached over to turn on my bedside light and froze because of what I saw. All of my clothes, which previously had been folded neatly in a basket, were now stacked atop of me, neck to toe. The piece of cloth that was setting over my face was a pair of my son's shorts, so of course I froze and listened for whoever was in my home. I stayed that way for about 10 minutes hearing nothing, so I got up and started to search the house. The only person that lived with me was my 8-year-old son, and I found him fast asleep in his top bunk. I know he didn't stack those clothes because the bunk he was in was metal and very squeaky, and he would have definitely made noise getting in or out. He's a pretty serious kid, and I've never known him to play tricks. In any case, I felt that last piece go over my face, so I know he wasn't there for that. I searched the entire house and no one was there but us. I believe it was poltergeist activity. Apparently stacking is typical of what poltergeists do. I also found a random puddle of water once in the middle of the living room when no one had been home. There was no place the water could have come from either. Very strange stuff.
This happened to my father when he was a younger man, and a great uncle. They had decided to go drinking and decided to go to this local church. Their mother and aunt told them not to do it, but the alcohol, of course, is sitting in, and they wanted to have some fun. So they walk a couple of miles and start beating and banging on the piano, turning the lights on and off. When all of a sudden, the lights get shut off, but not by my uncle or my father, but mysteriously just cut off. And when they do, my father, who is beating and banging the piano, feels an iron grip grab his legs, and it doesn't let go of him for a few minutes. But when it finally does, they are both incredibly sober. So they take a moment to run to the door, but it won't open. They claim it's like an iron bar in front of it, keeping it shut. They sober up even more, and when the door is finally released and they can leave, they'd run the 2 miles back home whiter than cotton, and that was the first and last time they ever decided to mess around in church.
My name is Yvonne, and this is the first time I write about what happened to me when I was a child. I was about 9 years old. Allow me to tell you about my family history in order to best understand what I'm talking about. I am the youngest of a big Hispanic family of 12 children. During the early 1970s, my family and I were living in a small village in Chihuahua, Mexico, near the mountains, which made the woods our backyard. My father was a Japanese man who migrated to Mexico with a distant family friend. When he got there, he married my 13-year-old mother through an arranged marriage coordinated by my grandmother. My parents were both somewhat religious, but more than anything, superstitious. Their superstitious beliefs influenced all of mine. For the common symptoms of a cold and flu, it was always the same home remedies, such as herbs and teas, that we grew ourselves, or that we would just walk into the deep woods to collect. For upset tummies, it would be yerba buena or mint tea. If that didn't work, try epazote, a bitter root from a strange plant. It was 4 to 6 teaspoons of castor oil at least 3 times a week. You see, my mother believed that clean intestines equaled a healed body. Our family of 14 lived in a small shack, like a cabin, but less fancy, in the middle of nowhere. We had oil lamps, candles, and our giant wood-burning stove that my siblings and I would surround, especially during the winter season when the snow would basically block the only door we had. I saw plenty of unusual things out of our window that faced directly into the woods, but that is a story for another day. In my village there was a medicine man who we called El Sobador. The villagers would say this so-called medicine man charged extra pesos for his prayers, and 1 peso back then was of significant value, especially for a huge family like ours. The small village also had a lady who was referred to as La Partera. The lady assisted the pregnant women with the arrivals of their new bundles of joy. At present time, these special women are professionals and are now called midwives. My parents had unique beliefs. We had handmade dream catchers that we placed at the entrance of where we all slept. Every time it rained, we were supposed to take it outside the shack and gently shake the oversized, ugly, nightmare-infested dream catcher. The bad spirits would disappear in the rain, and the dream catcher was once again ready to catch our nightmares before they entered our dreams. My mother used to say that we were children, and that if we happened to die, we would go straight to heaven, as long as we apologized to each other and said our prayers before going to bed. I still had bad dreams every now and then, so my mother insisted it was because of the dream catcher was nightmare infested. The time came when I got really sick, and when I saw her, or it, then I thought, this is it. I'm gonna go to heaven. For the first few days I really enjoyed the wonderful care my mother was offering to me. I couldn't wait for her to arrive to feed me something yummy, as she carried my herbal tea on this big, round, bright red Coca-Cola tin tray. As the days passed by, I started to feel weaker, and when my mother held me close to her chest, she quietly wept. Her warm tears would fall on my face like drops of sorrow. She wanted to be strong, but her little girl was dying, and she had done everything humanly possible. It It was out of her hands now. The end was nigh. Everything that my mother baked or cooked in her small kitchen I no longer had any interest in eating, and her teas were now ineffective. The nearest city was many kilometers away, and we had no money to pay for a real doctor, and it would take days to make it to the city on horse and cart. The cool compressors my mother would put on my forehead felt like steam coming off my head, and then I saw it sitting there at the edge of my cot. But no one was allowed to sit on my cot. Who was it? More rather, what was it? I didn't recognize it. Certainly if the boys would see it, they would tell her that I wasn't supposed to have any visitors sit on my cot, only my mother. But she wasn't talking to my mother or me, or anyone for that matter. I was too weak to do anything, but I was curious, like 9-year-olds are. I had to force my eyes to stay open for a bit longer as I choked on my tears, and upon swallowing, felt a burning in my throat. The thing, or whatever it was, looked terrifying, and it was sitting by my feet. I couldn't even move my limbs, they were too weak. My voice was tired, and I just wanted to sleep. My mother heard me call her and immediately came up to my cot, but she didn't seem to understand what I was saying. I was pointing directly at it, but my mother didn't seem to hear me or see it. That thing was next to me night and day. It looked like a woman, but its back was turned away from me. She was wearing a long, raggedy black lace dress with a black veil that covered her face, head, and it just blended in with the rest of her. I asked when I had the strength, "¿Quién eres?" which means "who are you?" But my voice was just a whisper, and was very scared. I gasped and squeezed my eyes together, covering my head with my blanket, hoping that it was just a figment of my imagination. Once I opened my eyes, I thought the thing would be gone, but it was still there. I could now hear my mother crying very loudly, and my father was now measuring up my body's length, since he would be the one making my small coffin, which was typical for fathers in those days. I glanced at the deep sadness in his face. His already puffy eyelids and his bushy eyebrows could not hide how fretful he must have felt to have to be the one in charge of such a duty. But even he knew of my impending doom. My siblings circled my small bed, and the youngest boys begged, "Please don't go to heaven." I was scared, but as a child I had imagined that going to heaven would hurt. But my limp little body didn't hurt, and my tears didn't want to come out. Somehow I wanted to let my siblings know how much I loved them and how much I would miss them. As I was watching my siblings weep loudly, my 9-year-old brain was concerned about our dream catcher, as I oversaw keeping it nightmare-free. I worried about how my siblings would be after I went to heaven. I was afraid they would forget to shake our oversized dream catcher and would have awful dreams as a result. We were dirt poor, and I wanted to tell them to share my last food rations with Mother, as she always was the last one who sat down at our freshly scented pine table that Father had made to accommodate our large family. I was having a difficult time not only speaking, but deciding who would keep my wood furniture my father had made for me. Days had passed, and my fear of not being able to see my family again just made it so much harder to breathe. My mother's soft prayers were scary to me, as if she was asking God to take her instead, and that I was a child who deserved to live. To think of her selfless love for me brings a tear to my eye. To know my mother was willing to die for me makes me love her even more. I heard a loud commotion among my parents. I wanted to know what the excitement was, but my own body was holding me captive. Then my 2 younger siblings said something along the lines of, "A new medicine man has come to our village, and she's on her way to see you." That's when I felt hope inside. The new medicine man was a woman, and in my country, they're called curandera. My father was almost smiling, but I imagined that my unwanted visitor would get spooked with all the commotion. But it remained. What had appeared even closer to me and was still unmoving. I was examined by the curandera, and even though my family didn't believe in modern medicine, By now, this beautiful, satin-skinned German doctor represented a big hope. I didn't understand what was happening. Had it all been a bad dream? Was I not going to heaven anymore? In my confused mental state, I thought if that horrific thing remained visible, then my death was imminent. I struggled with the heaviness of my little body to turn onto my right side from facing the paint-chipped wall. I watched the sun was shining its last rays through the heaviness of the trees surrounding our shack. The curtains on the windows were gently swaying with the light evening breeze. I didn't see the strange figure where it usually was by my feet. I shrieked and finally had the strength to call for my mother. My mother came in and was so happy to hear my voice and wanted to know why I was screaming. I welcomed her warm embrace. I told her about the dark figure in the shape of the woman. She smiled, and as she looked around, with her facial expression assured me that nothing was there. Mother told me that they almost lost me, but the curandera had saved my life. Apparently I had been devastatingly ill, bedbound for about a month. The modern medicine woman was giving me daily injections of pretty powerful medication. I had my 3rd dose, but how come I didn't remember the needle puncturing my skin? I was terrified of needles. My mother returned to the kitchen, and I felt so weak, but somehow I felt as if everything could have been a dream, maybe a delusion caused by my illness. I couldn't be sure. I glanced over, and it was still there at my feet. As usual, I froze, and I just hoped my bed would swallow me whole. I was still very small and very weak. It started to visit less. It was around the 5th day of the curandera coming to our shack to inject my medication. My parents would have to hold me down since the needle puncturing a hole in my skin wasn't anything I looked forward to. Then I glanced over to my feet, and it wasn't there anymore. I sat up in my bed and glanced at the window. It was there. This was the first time I had seen it standing, and even though now I had the strength to scream, I couldn't. I just sat there and stared as my tears were flooding my face. It was most definitely a female-shaped being, about 5 feet tall, and the slimmest female I'd ever seen. I could see more than before, but it had its back turned, peeking from the sides of her black veil, where I could see some long, thin, grey strands of hair. On its right side, an extremely bony right hand which appeared to be holding something like a staff. Its fingers were very long and grey, and it wasn't saying a word nor moving, just standing there looking out the window as the very last rays of sun had come from between the tall trees. The last day I saw it was when the beautiful German curandera came to check on me to give me the last injection. I could hear my siblings outside arguing with each other, and as I stood up from my bed to look out the window, and there it was, standing, facing me now, too far and not enough daylight to see its features, but close enough to know it wasn't human. Then my 9-year-old brain imagined that perhaps this unusual being lived in the woods. There, it was standing almost blending in with a massive tree trunk in our backyard. I couldn't believe my eyes when it raised its bony arm and waved at me, as it slowly blended into the darkness. It almost appeared to have walked backwards, blending into the tree trunk. I had too many questions, but now I was questioning my own sanity. How long has it been since it had rained? Was our dream catcher nightmare infested? How long had it been since I shook the nightmares in the rain? Maybe I had forgotten to do that. To this very day, I remain unsure. But I did get better, and I'm so grateful I recovered and never saw that entity again. My friend is a military man, and his family owns a house in a rural area in the Philippines. Nueva Ecija, to be exact. I believe it was some sort of family inheritance. The area around the house had been subject to treasure hunters in search for the infamous and often disputed Yamashita's gold. They decided to put a stop to the digging by going there for themselves to address the issue and also have a vacation at the same time. Their whole family went, from his dad, who was also from the military, to his mum and his 2 sisters. When they got there, their neighbors advised them to make sure they get inside their house by 5 p.m. without offering any explanation. They found that piece of advice quite odd, but they did so anyway, in case it had something to do with the local wildlife. They stayed in their respective rooms that night, but didn't get much rest because of the strange things that they saw. My friend was getting ready for bed when he noticed that outside the window across the field near the neighbor's property, there was a big dog-like creature. He went to the window to get a better look, and he saw this beast that was besides the neighbor's Volkswagen Beetle. What took him aback was that this dog was as big as the car. Then something else caught his eye. A large head, sticking out above a line of coconut trees being illuminated by the moonlight, staring right at him, possibly a Capri. He quickly closed the window and decided to stay in bed, not knowing if he was seeing things or not. That same night, his sisters had been hanging out in the dining area when they saw a curtain floating around. At first they thought it was just the wind blowing it around, so they ignored it. But shortly after realized there was no wind, with all the windows closed, and not a breeze in sight. They freaked out, ran to their rooms, and hid under their sheets for the rest of the night. His parents weren't spared from the freak show at all. In their room there was an antique closet with nothing in it. At random times during the night, it would swing open, making quite some noise, and after a while would just slam shut on its own. They were sleepy and tired from the day, so they just let it be, thinking it must have been the wind. The next morning they recounted their experiences and decided that for the next night they'll all stay in the living room together, figuring that they'll be safer that way. They wanted to stay since it was a long trip going to their rural house, and it felt like a waste if they didn't maximize the visit. That night as planned, they slept in the living room. My friend's slumber was interrupted by the sound of heavy breathing and hot air blowing in his face. My friend opened his eyes and his heart skipped a beat after seeing an enormous black mass with red eyes floating above and staring straight back at him. He immediately closed his eyes and tried to grab his gun, but it was just out of reach. He tried to nudge his dad awake, who was also beside him, but to no avail. He finally decided to whisper to him, "Pa, there's something on top of us." His father then replied in a very annoyed yet freaked out tone, "I know, just shut your eyes and go to sleep." They immediately left at the first sign of light. Their week-long vacation reduced to just 2 days. Also, it just so happened that their house was right next to a cemetery. My friend is a very straightforward guy, so coming from him I tend to believe this story. The only things he wonders about is not being able to attempt a shot at the floating black thing, but he says he didn't want to repeat that again. I just asked him to refresh his memory about the story, and his hairs were at their end. Goosebumps everywhere. I think I'm marked. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born August 23rd, 1992. My mother had went into labor on the 21st, and the doctors delivered me at 8:08 a.m. weighing 8 pounds, just as Hurricane Andrew ravaged Florida. I had horrible night terrors as an infant child, and some of my earliest memories are of me waking up screaming and thrashing, with scratches and bruises all over my body, and seeing monsters when I closed my eyes. It stopped around the age of 8, and I almost forgot about it until I was 13, and my mother and I started photographing graveyards. That's when I started to hear voices and see spirits. I could get a sense of if we were welcome or unwelcome, and how powerful the entities were around me. This seemingly opened the floodgates of what I guessed are latent powers to when I started having strong premonitions of people and events around me. Then when I worked as a bouncer at some bars in Ohio, I met a strange man dressed like a Vietnam vet who bummed a smoke from me and told me some cryptic advice about, "Hello, Leo. When you go home tonight and lay your head down, ask yourself this: will you be standing against the dark at my side, or will you sacrifice others to save yourself?" I told him my name was Chris, and he just smiled and introduced himself as Dante, and then walked away despite me calling after him. I tried following him through the crowd, but he'd seemingly vanished, and no one else recalled seeing him. Then on another night, at a biker bar during a heavy metal show, a large man dressed like a biker with chains and rings and blue jeans and big black boots walked right up beside me and smiled and clasped a big, strong hand on my shoulder and bought me a shot of whiskey and a pint of beer and laughed and drank with me but didn't say much over the music. But I couldn't take my eyes off him because something about him being close to 6'7" and close to 300 pounds of muscle with long blonde matted hair and a scruffy beard with piercing blue eyes fascinated me. What caught my attention the most was on his hip hung a massive pistol with engravings down the side and a Trinity symbol on the hilt. I told him he couldn't have that in the bar and he said, "No worries, Chris. I'm just enjoying the music and wanted to meet you in person. I'll be leaving now. Take care, and now I'll be watching. Remember, brother, ride the lightning." He walked outside, and I saw him hop on his motorcycle, and it roared like nothing I'd ever heard before, and he smiled and sped off into the distance. Right after that, and stopped working in bars, and was at a friend's house, who despite my protests started messing around with a Ouija board, and all the lights shattered in the house, and a shadowy figure appeared across the street, causing all the lights to flicker. There was then a blinding flash of light, and it was gone. Then suddenly my mind filled with a searing white light that told me it had taken it away someplace else, but I would have to be the one to send it back because I'm marked. I have dreams where I see a man dressed in a white suit with gold glasses, drinking what looks like molten gold from a glass in a magnificent parlor room, where he plays chess with a woman dressed in a grey pantsuit. I also have dreams and visions of battles and past memories, and of that biker riding through the desert, and a massive lightning storm at his back as he laughs, plunging into clouds of darkness, shouting about how it's a good day to die, and he will rejoice in Valhalla. And that is a brief summary of some of what I have encountered. I left out some stuff like how I was speaking to a woman who claimed to be the leader of an organization called the 100, and that her name was Beatrice, the Witch of the Mind, and all the stuff I saw with her. Anyway, if anyone knows something about what I've been speaking about, I would really appreciate some insight, as I have no idea about some of the goings-on in my life. The first hospital I worked at had a haunted room. It wasn't really a room, it was a larger, mini unit with 4 beds and monitors that were used as a higher acuity area. The code blue call light would go on and off when no one was in it, and biomedical had checked out several times but couldn't find anything wrong with the system, and even after replacing it completely it still happened. Equipment and people's personal items would go missing and turn up in there. Things would randomly fall over or move around. We had several patients who asked to be moved out of that room because no matter what the thermostat setting was, they complained it was freezing. But the scariest one happened to me when I had a dementia patient in that room, and while I was rounding on her, she asked me to close the door because of that scary man who keeps watching me.